The tale kicks off with the absolute annihilation of the Hilt bloodline. Crimson stained their fortress walls as black hellfire devoured the stone, leaving corridors choked with the dead. Amidst this gruesome slaughter stood a solitary figure, Lavis Vindica, the terrifying heir to the Vindica dynasty. The last breathing Hilt dragged his broken body across the rubble, hacking up Crimson as he rasped, "Do you honestly think you can walk away from this?" Having slaughtered the entire house, Lavis just pierced him with an icy glare. He scoffed, asking if the man actually believed he marched in here, blind to the filth and sins their family buried. For Lavis, this bloodbath was never senseless slaughter. It was a necessary execution. The victim's pupils dilated in sheer terror right before Lavis incinerated him, in pitch-black fire, erasing the Hilt name from history. But butchering a ruling demonic house unleashed massive shockwaves. Shortly after, Lavis found himself hauled to the foot of the ultimate seat of power, facing the demon king himself, Gamadir Vindica, his own flesh and blood. From the shadows, the 12 black thrones watched in dead silence. Gamdir's voice boomed through the hall, demanding how his son dared to butcher an entire noble family unprompted. The ruler decreed that Lavis had shattered the delicate balance of the underworld. He called him a reckless butcher, rather than a calculating inquisitor. Yet not a single drop of sweat broke on Lavis's face. He snapped back, exposing the Hilt's endless atrocities that the court had conveniently ignored. He openly sneered at the High Lords for playing the role of righteous judges, while letting pure rot fester throughout the entire realm. Unfazed Gamdir coldly reminded him that execution laws were absolute. He declared his son possessed zero authority to pass down sentences based on personal whims. Lavis let out a mocking bark of laughter, firing back that the underworld had always operated on one simple truth: absolute, devouring lesser shadows. To him, the survival of the fittest was the only code demons truly respected. He accused the Hilts of quietly plotting to usurp the crown, insisting that purging them was a brutal necessity to protect the very existence of the Vindica bloodline. He fiercely reminded his father that he was only dispatched as an inquisitor in the first place because every other coward in the room was terrified of crossing the Hilts. A heavy, suffocating silence hung in the air. Despite the prince's passionate defense, Gamdir finally spoke, announcing that a verdict had already been cemented alongside the 12 black thrones. The sentence: permanent banishment to the mortal realm. His punishment for breaking sacred laws and erasing an ancient family. For the very first time, the prince's arrogant facade shattered. Disbelief contorted his features as he bellowed, demanding to know if this was some twisted joke. The king mercilessly decreed that his son would walk among weak mortals, stripped of his magic, forced to learn what true royal dignity actually meant. Desperation creeping in, Lavis furiously argued that he merely crushed their physical vessels, leaving their souls completely intact. He insisted they would eventually be reborn, making his crime, but his pleas fell on deaf ears. The 12 lords encircled him, igniting ancient glowing spell arrays across the floor. Blazing chains of dark fire lashed out, violently, binding his limbs while he roared in pure, unadulterated fury. Spitting curse, he shrieked that his actions were entirely justified, violently resisting his fate. Suddenly, a lord named Banbei stepped forward, taunting the fallen prince before blasting half his face with scorching hellfire. With a cruel, sarcastic, he wished him a miserable vacation in the mortal dirt. An instant later, the inferno swallowed Lavis whole, wiping his presence from the underworld entirely. The terms of his banishment were ironclad. He was doomed to survive inside whatever pathetic mortal vessel he possessed. Murdering humans? Banned. Ending his own suffering? Strictly forbidden. If he dared to violate those two conditions, his soul would be in. Lavis jolted awake in a cramped, unfamiliar bedroom, throwing himself out of bed as he desperately gasped for oxygen. The agony of the flames had vanished, but a sickening wrongness washed over him. He stared down at his violently shaking palms, only to realize they were disgustingly soft, frail, and powerless. He fiercely smacked his own cheek, scrambling to process the nightmare. The impossible had actually happened. The terrifying demon prince was exiled. Trapped in this pathetic mortal realm, Lavis made a blood vow. The absolute second he clawed his way back to the underworld, he was going to rip. He forced himself out of bed, but his trembling legs almost buckled instantly. Agony violently flared through every muscle, making even the simple act of drawing a breath feel like inhaling glass. Lavis sneered at his surroundings. This sterile human world was utterly devoid of the comforting stench of sulfur and raw demonic power. Before he could even process his bizarre reality, the bedroom door flew open, and a frantic young girl burst in. Catching sight of him on his feet, her eyes immediately welled up with heavy tears. She threw her arms around him in a desperate, bone-crushing. She choked out that she thought he was gone forever. Meanwhile, Lavis just stood there, stiff as a board, absolutely clueless as to who this weeping stranger was. Moments later, an older woman rushed in, her face streaked with tears as she cried out the name, Miho. Ah, so that was the identity of the fragile meat sack. The demon prince quietly deduced that these emotional mortals had to be Miho's immediate family. As he endured the awkward smothering, in stark contrast to the weeping women, this guy's face was completely frozen and dead-eyed. He locked a chilling gaze onto Lavis, demanding the boy snap out of his daze and drag himself back to class by tomorrow morning. Apparently, this body had been comatose in that bed for a full 7 days. Miho's mother desperately pleaded his case, arguing that her son was still far too fragile. But the father ruthlessly silenced her with a single word and walked out. Oddly enough, a wicked smirk crept across Lavis's face. For the very first time since crashing into this mortal plane, he had finally spotted someone who gave that man's suffocating, ice-cold presence felt. The following morning, Lavis headed to campus, escorted by a heavily anxious sister who couldn't stop fretting over him. Glaring at the drab architecture, the demon curled his lip in utter repulsion. It figured. Even back in the underworld, academic institutions were... He slouched silently at his desk, already calculating a brutal scheme to claw his way back home. He needed to reclaim his rightful throne before the mighty Vindica bloodline completely crumbled in his absence. But his grand plotting was violently derailed when 2 punk classmates swaggered up behind him. One of the jerks forcefully gripped his shoulder, flashing a nasty grin as he demanded the cash Miho supposedly owed them. The absolute second that dirty hand made contact, a tidal wave of Miho's buried flashbacks of relentless torment and soul-crushing humor. This fragile kid had been ruthlessly battered, degraded, and extorted by these exact bullies, silently swallowing. Suddenly, the agonizing soreness radiating through his current vessel made perfect, sickening. Before Lavis could even process the rage, one of the bullies viciously slapped the back of his head. The punk sneered, mocking him for waking up even more brain-dead than before, and then barked at him to cough up his daily protection fee. In his entire immortal existence, not a single creature as utterly insignificant. A dark memory from his days at the Demon Academy suddenly flashed through Lavis's mind. He pictured his old classroom where young Hellspawn were explicitly taught why mortals were the absolute lowest scum of the universe. One little demon had enthusiastically shouted that humans were hideous, spineless worms, just squirming through the dirt. Another student proudly chimed in that they definitely reeked of garbage. Their instructor, Professor Cynthia, had simply offered a chilling nod. She backed up every single cruel word. She declared mortals to be sickeningly vile parasites, who constantly masked their own fragile nature behind a web of lies. They shielded themselves with pathetic emotions and She ruthlessly mocked their stupidity, noting how they blindly worshipped both angels and demons without truly grasping the terror of either. Back then, a younger Lavis had coldly stated that such worthless trash should just be tossed into a raging bonfire. Cynthia had beamed with sadistic pride, instructing him that if he ever crossed paths with a mortal, he needed to squash them instantly. Zero hesitation. Reliving that specific lesson poured gasoline on his boiling fury. A pathetic, filthy mortal had actually dared to assault a royal demon. Lavis balled his fists so hard his knuckles turned white. In a flash of brutal speed, he gripped Tai Wu by the scalp and violently slammed the bully's face straight through the wooden desk. Tai Wu shrieked in bloody agony, spitting out curses as he thrashed around wildly. But Lavis just stared down at the bleeding punk with absolute terrifying disgust, scoffing at just how utterly pathetic and brainless human beings actually were. Taewoo's buddy Song Jun completely snapped. He charged straight at Lavis like a raging bull, screaming at the top of his lungs that Miho had totally lost his damn mind. As Sung Jun launched a wild hook at his face, Lavis suddenly felt a bizarre sensation. The suppressed demonic energy flowing through his veins actually flared up in response to the raw hostility. He casually sidestepped the clumsy punch, his mind racing as he realized that pure human malice might actually act as a catalyst for his magic. Eager to test out this brand new theory, the exiled prince didn't hold back. He unleashed a devastating right hook, burying his knuckles deep into Seongjun's cheek with terrifying power, launching. The deafening crash echoed, leaving the entire classroom trapped in absolute. Lavis slowly lowered his gaze, staring down at his own hand with a genuinely puzzled expression. The absolute laws of exile dictated that every single drop of his dark power was supposed to be completely locked away in this pathetic, mortal realm. And yet his mana was undeniably sparking to life the second violence erupted anywhere near him. Right as he was busy dissecting this glorious loophole, a nervous classmate named Shion broke the tension, shakily calling out to ask if he was actually the exact same pushover Miho they had always known. But before Lavis could even utter a single word, Taewoo furiously snatched up a heavy steel chair and lunged. A panicked student shrieked a warning, but Lavis barely even blinked. Pivoting on his heel in a split second, he planted a vicious. Taewoo crumpled to the linoleum floor, desperately wheezing and choking for oxygen. Meanwhile, Lavis just casually strolled over, his eyes cold and entirely dead. He smoothly recited his old tutor Cynthia's lesson about how mortals desperately use arrogance to mask their own, figuring that acting tough was somehow their twisted way of generating strength. Just as Taewoo painfully scrambled to, Lavis flawlessly whipped his leg up and delivered a crushing strike right beneath his chin, instantly knocking the guy out cold. The self-proclaimed tough guys, Taewoo and Seongjun, were now nothing more than broken heaps groaning on the floorboards. Every single jaw in the room dropped, the terrified teenagers completely paralyzed by pure disbelief. Nobody could even begin to process how their absolute favorite punching bag, the hopelessly weak Miho, had transformed into an absolute monster overnight. Lavis flashed a wickedly arrogant smirk, internally laughing right in his father's face. If this pitiful display was what laying low, then living among humans was going to be painfully boring. Scanning the petrified crowd with an insanely dark grin, he casually invited anyone else to step up and talk trash. Naturally, every single student instantly scrambled to look at the ground, absolutely terrified to make eye contact. Even Shion was trembling, entirely blown away by the fact that the scrawny kid secretly possessed this kind of lethal hidden strength. Swallowing his fear, Shion took a couple of hesitant steps forward. The demon prince just locked eyes with him, in dead silence, slowly recalling that out of all the trash in this room, Shion honestly seemed like he had a shred of actual value. Lavis made a quick mental note, deciding that this kid was definitely obedient enough to serve as his personal. Flashing a deeply unsettling smile, he simply brushed off the question. Fast forward to the late afternoon. The final bell rang, and the newly formed duo walked out of the campus gates. Shion endlessly gushing over how insanely cool it was to watch Miho completely dismantle those two massive bullies single-handedly. He even started joking around, playfully asking if he was secretly an overpowered reincarnator straight out of some hit webtoon or magic fantasy novel. Hearing the word reincarnator actually made Lavis's heart skip a beat, instantly terrified that this random teenager had somehow managed to deduce his real demonic identity. Luckily, Shion was just a massive nerd who spent way too much time reading comic books about magic systems. As they kept strolling down the sidewalk, Lavis's mind drifted back to a heavy conversation he had shared with an old demonic comrade right before getting banished. During that chat, his buddy had practically begged him to remember the golden rule. Breaking that taboo guaranteed absolute and permanent soul annihilation. Naturally, a younger Lavis had just laughed right in his face, arrogantly arguing that it made zero sense since humans gleefully murdered each other on a daily basis anyway. But his friend firmly explained that humans were tragically fragile beings, shielded by divine laws, operating far above the demonic hierarchy, intensely warning him never to play games with those cosmic boundaries. At the time, Lavis had just scoffed, but destiny had officially slapped him in the face. Lavis stared into the fading twilight, quietly calculating how exactly he was supposed to shut these pathetic mortals up if murder was completely off the table. Right then, Shion broke the silence. He muttered that he honestly wished reincarnation wasn't just a myth, simply because he was desperate to ditch this living nightmare and wake up in some totally different world. Lavis instantly caught the raw, bleeding trauma. Shion forced a dry chuckle, quickly brushing it off by saying he knew those kinds of fantasies were pure garbage. But his daily existence was brutal enough to make escaping reality sound pretty damn good. Hearing that actually took a slight weight off Lavis's shoulders, because it proved Shion was still totally clueless about the monster walking beside him. But the second Shion practically swooned and called him cool, Lavis did a full-body cringe, completely repulsed. Soaking up compliments from a filthy mortal was the ultimate insult to a high-born demon lord of his status. Later that night, Lavis stared at his bedroom ceiling, obsessing over the bizarre spark his magic had thrown off earlier. A demon stuffed into a frail, fleshy meat sack shouldn't be channeling a single drop of mana. And yet his dark energy undeniably surged back to life. The second, raw violence and pure aggression flooded the room. Slowly, a wicked, arrogant smirk carved its way across his face. Maybe getting exiled to Earth couldn't actually chain the great Lavis Vindica. But the exact second that thought crossed his mind, white-hot agony shredded through his veins. He crumpled back into the mattress, gasping, brutally realizing that Miho's pathetic mortal shell would completely shatter if it held even a fraction of true demonic might. He had only survived as a human for 24 hours, and his physical vessel already felt like it had been tossed into a meat grinder. Even so, absolute exhaustion crashed over him like a tidal wave, dragging him into a dead sleep within seconds. The following day dragged by in absolute boring silence, right up until the final bell rang. Lavis and Xion walked out of the gates side by side, with Xion beaming about how amazing it felt to finally just have a normal, drama-free afternoon. He practically glowed, pointing out that absolutely nobody dared to mess with them anymore, all thanks to Miho. Lavis just scoffed, rolling his eyes in bitter disappointment, and bluntly stated he actually preferred getting jumped. He was itching for another fight, just to test the limits of his newly awakened magic. Literally 2 seconds after dropping that wish, a harsh voice barked at them from behind. Lavis spun around, locking eyes with Tae-woo, who was flanking a gang of heavily built upperclassmen. Yep, the crybaby had totally whined to his big brothers after getting publicly destroyed yesterday. The biggest guy in the pack stomped forward, glaring daggers as he growled, demanding to know if Lavis was the punk who laid hands on his little bro. He arrogantly claimed they had been acting as Tae-woo's personal bodyguards this whole time, just charging a tiny protection fee for their services. And yet Miho had the absolute audacity to spit on that charity by pounding the kid's face in. Xion's face instantly drained of all color, terrified. But Lavis looked absolutely thrilled. A manic, eager grin stretched from ear to ear as he casually shrugged and confessed that, yeah, he absolutely wrecked Tae-woo. Furious, the upperclassman barked an order for the two of them to follow his crew. A short walk later, they were standing inside the dusty concrete shell of an abandoned construction. The lead thug immediately tore into Tae-woo, trashing him for crawling back home looking like a beaten dog after getting his ass handed to him. Tae-woo stammered out a pathetic apology, staring at the dirt in absolute humiliation. Done with his lackey, the alpha bully slowly pivoted toward Lavis, tilting his head and wondering out loud how exactly he should break him. He sneered that if he let this slide, his reputation as a protective older brother would be completely ruined. Stepping into Lavis's personal space, he aggressively jabbed and taunted him, asking if Miho's sweet mommy was the one who taught him to crack his friends' skulls. Lavis's eyes flashed with frozen malice as he and deadpanned that, yeah, maybe she actually did. The thug barked a dry, annoyed laugh, practically writing the kid off as a complete psychopath. He instantly threw a brutal haymaker straight at Lavis's jaw, but Lavis didn't even flinch. He snatched the guy's wrist right out of the air. Then Lavis clamped down, tightening his fingers like a steel vise, until the sickening snap of bone echoed off the concrete walls. The alpha bully howled in absolute agony, frantically jerking his arm back, but escaping Lavis was like trying to pull free from a hydraulic press. Before anyone could even blink, Lavis drove a devastating hook directly into the center of the guy's face. Every single blow landed with nightmarish weight, triggering a sudden flashback of his true mother back in the underworld. Among their kind, she was legendary, the venomous queen who practically invented poisonous tongues, the grand architect of soul-crushing curses and vile insults. Her ultimate philosophy was, simple, brutal violence only breaks the meat, but venomous words rot the spirit from the inside out. Mortals abused both tactics, purely out of desperation, completely terrified of facing their own pathetic reality. Watching their leader get utterly demolished, Tae-woo and his gang stood frozen. Watching their so-called boss get absolutely dismantled, the rest of the gang started screaming at each other to stop freezing up and jump Minho all at once to bury him for good. Catching wind of that threat just stretched a wicked ear-to-ear grin across. If pure human hatred actually supercharged his demonic core, then taking on an entire mob was basically the ultimate feast. His eyes flared with pure thrill as he launched himself headfirst into the swarm. Every single strike was ruthless and perfectly calculated. A single explosive right hook crushed a thug's nose. A devastating blow dropped the next punk out cold, while a vicious roundhouse kick folded another guy perfectly in half. Within seconds, the dusty construction zone transformed into an absolute slaughterhouse. Xian stood completely paralyzed, his jaw practically hitting the floor as he witnessed the absolute carnage. He could not wrap his head around the fact that this was the same Minho who used to be their daily punching bag. Now, those exact same tormentors were dropping like flies, completely helpless to even throw a decent punch. Minutes later, the brawl finally wrapped up. Actually, let's be real. The one-sided execution wrapped up. The entire gang was sprawled out in the dirt, whimpering in absolute agony, while Levis stood tall, totally untouchable, in the dead center of the wreckage. For the very first time since crashing down into the mortal realm, he actually felt a surge of true relief. It suddenly clicked why mortals were so deeply obsessed with throwing hands and spitting trash talk. Back in the underworld, his uncle always preached that raw brutality was mankind's greatest talent, while his mother basically held a masterclass in crafting wicked curses and venomous insults. At the time, Lavis brushed off those theories as total garbage, but right now, it all made perfect sense. Mortals vented their inner demons through bloody brawls, and somehow that exact toxic energy was directly fueling his dark magic. But while he soaked up the victory, a tiny rat was lurking in the shadows, tracking his every single move. This was not some random street rodent, though. This was a low-level hellspawn acting as a literal spy for the underworld. Every single brutal second of that fight was being live-streamed straight to Levis's uncle, Varkan Vindica. The ancient demon sat there entirely unfazed, monitoring the whole bloody spectacle through an enchanted basin. Right next to him, Lavis's demonic buddy was kicking back with a massive smirk. Smug as hell, the friend bragged about pulling a fast one. Instead of shoving a crippling suppression stone into Lavis when he got banished, he sneaked a crystal of pure demon blood into his system instead. He just wanted to place a sick bet on how long his buddy could survive while clawing his dark magic back on Earth. Varkan let out a dark chuckle, openly admitting it still blew his mind that Lavis actually wiped the entire Hilt bloodline off the map, completely solo. Lavis's partner just shrugged, pointing out that Varkan's nephew was a total maniac who would never sleep until he executed his own twisted version of justice. In his eyes, there was not a single soul in the universe capable of snapping Lavis Vindica's ironclad will. Varkan let out a heavy sigh. He muttered about how Gamadhir was completely cold-blooded to toss his own flesh and blood into the mortal dumpster without blinking an eye. But the friend didn't care. He argued that crushing brutal domination was the only language a wild card like Levis, plus that ruthless mindset was practically ripped straight from the Demon King's personal playbook. Varkan pointed out that the mortal world was a dumping ground exclusively for sinners whose crimes were too twisted even for literal demons. Out there, Levis was guaranteed to crash headfirst into absolute soul-crushing Staring at the projection, he wondered out loud exactly when that absolute problem child leveled up enough to trigger this kind of massive chaos. Smiling playfully, the friend hovered his hands over the water, funneling an even thicker cloud of dark magic down into the basin. Lurking in the pitch-black shadows, a massive horde of low-tier monsters kept their eyes glued to Lavis's glitching projection. A greedy grin cracked across Varkan's face as he quietly wondered how many days it would take before his nephew was completely swallowed. Cut back to the mortal realm. Lavis was chilling inside a cramped, dingy diner alongside. The duo was absolutely torching their taste buds with nuclear-level spicy rice cakes, while a totally hyped-up Xian kept babbling about the epic beatdown at the construction zone. Lavis casually shoved another red-hot bite into his mouth, cockily asking if this pathetic tingle was mankind's sad attempt at copying actual hellfire. But Xian was just giving him the most awkward, wide-eyed stare. Mainly because absolute waterfalls of tears were quite literally pouring. Getting totally defensive, Lavis instantly barked that his eyes were just sweating. He aggressively slurped down more fiery food. He proudly declared that any hellspawn who backed down from fire was a total disgrace to the underworld. Right as he said that, Xian's cell phone started buzzing like crazy. The caller ID flashed the name Jingy, and every single drop of blood instantly drained out of the kid's face. Lavis instantly picked up on the sheer panic radiating off him. He demanded to know what was going down, but Xian shot up from his chair in a flash, stuttering out a lame excuse about an urgent emergency he had to take care of. Despite the cover-up, The demon easily locked onto the way Xian's hands were violent. Right before the kid sprinted out the diner door like his life to fast forward to the dead of night. Buried underground inside a sketchy secret tattoo shop, some guy was screaming his absolute lungs out while strapped violently to a chair. A lethal-looking woman named Jinji casually ran a buzzing tattoo gun across his forehead, icily warning him to stay still unless he wanted to suffer. In her eyes, this entire bloody mess could have been skipped if the guy had just paid his debts on time. Wiping the blood away, she flashed a twisted, proud smirk, admiring the word fief now permanently etched into his skin. Right on cue, her lackey announced Xian's arrival. The kid shuffled into the room, shaking like a leaf. Jinji instantly snapped at him for being late, grabbing his jaw in a vice grip and forcing him to look straight at the broken man slumped on the sofa. She made it crystal clear that this fresh ink was a lifelong brand for scum who failed to pay up. Releasing her grip, her voice turned to ice as she demanded a progress report on Xian's personal mission. She needed to know if every little detail was still running. Unable to tear his eyes away from the bleeding tattoo, Xian stuttered. The words barely left his mouth before Jinji backhanded him, sending him crashing hard onto. Looming over him, she hissed, asking if he honestly thought they were playing some kind of sick game. Snatching up the buzzing tattoo gun, she gave the signal, and her goons instantly pinned Xian's arms behind his back. As the whirring needle hovered mere inches from his face, Xian practically screamed, begging her not to mark him too. Jinji didn't blink, smoothly promising that one more failure would land him in the exact same spot as the deadbeat on the couch. Stumbling out of the parlor, Xian dragged himself home and collapsed in front of his glowing monitor, utterly silent. His fingers quivered over the keys as his gaze locked onto the small flash drive resting on the desk. Whatever twisted job Jinji was blackmailing him to pull off, it was practically his mind raced with thoughts of abandoning the whole thing, but sheer terror ultimately chained him back to the screen. Meanwhile, across town, Lavis was fighting a completely different kind of battle. He thrashed around on his mattress, violently clutching his gut and kicking. That insanely spicy meal had absolutely wrecked his system, leaving his insides on fire like he had literally swallowed molten lava. On top of that, every muscle screamed from the brawl earlier today. Glaring up at the ceiling, Lavis cursed just how pathetically fragile Miho's physical form truly was. The scuffle barely lasted a minute, yet his shoulders felt like they were snapping right off their hinges. But backing down simply wasn't in the DNA of someone named Lavis Vindica. Ripping his shirt off in the dead of night, he dropped to the floor and started cranking out push-ups, sweat pouring down his face. In his mind, no amount of mortal suffering could ever crack the iron. If this human vessel was a glass cannon, he would ruthlessly forge it into steel, no matter the cost. When morning rolled around, Xian dragged himself onto campus, looking like a total nervous wreck. He stared blankly at the flash drive gripped in his palm, Jinji's lethal threats echoing loudly in his ears. Paranoia was eating him alive, until a heavy hand suddenly clamped down on his shoulder. Xian yelped in sheer terror, spinning around, only to find Lavis staring right back at him. Tilting his head in confusion, Lavis demanded to know why he was jumping at shadows. For a split second, Xian actually thought about begging Miho for backup, remembering the raw power he displayed yesterday. A tiny spark of hope whispered that Lavis could pull him out of the fire, but he instantly crushed that thought. It did not matter how badass Miho had suddenly become. Tangling with a psycho like Jinji was a one-way ticket to the grave. While Lavis tried to read exactly what Xian was hiding, a mysterious girl breezed right past them in the corridor. The second her aura hit his radar, Lavis's expression darkened, sensing something terrifyingly nostalgic about her scent. Before he could piece the puzzle together, the girl suddenly passed out, face planting hard onto the linoleum. Xian sprinted over in a panic, carefully rolling her limp body onto her back. But the instant her eyelids fluttered open, both boys froze dead in their tracks. Lavis instantly detected something sinister lurking deep inside her, a heavy, demonic aura, which made absolutely zero sense. Mere humans were never supposed to harbor that kind of dark energy. Hearing the commotion, a teacher sprinted over and hauled the unconscious girl off to the nurse's office. As she was carried past, a distinct sliver of ink caught Lavis's eye, flashing right on her forearm. It was the crest of the Hilt clan, and Lavis's eyes instantly blew wide open. Why the hell would a random human girl be branded with the symbol of the very clan he had butchered with his own two hands? Wasting absolutely no time, he took matters into his own hands, determined to unravel this mystery himself. The second night fell. Lavis made a beeline for the hospital, holding that mysterious girl from earlier. Stepping right up to her ward, a rookie cop immediately blocked his path, flashing a polite smile while stating the patient was strictly off limits. Tilting her head, she asked if he was a friend of the victim. Lavis slowly pivoted, locking his chilling gaze dead into her pupils. Even running on absolute fumes with just scraps of mana left, he could still weave. A pitch-black shadow flared deep within his irises for a split second. Instantly, the officer's eyes rolled back. Slumping silently back into her chair, she went completely numb to the world, her consciousness entirely wiped clean. Pushing the door open, Lavis casually strolled inside, smirking to himself that even pathetic crumbs of power could get the job done. Hearing the latch click, the girl glared at him, visibly irritated as she snapped, demanding to know who the heck he was. Ice dripping from his voice. Lavis threw the question right back, demanding her true identity. Totally bewildered, she started whining about him barging. In a blinding flash, Lavis snatched her wrist, violently yanking her forward. She shrieked in agony, desperately thrashing to break free, but he completely tuned out her cries. His deadly focus remained glued to the bizarre ink seared into her flesh. He viciously demanded to know how a filthy human dared to brandish the sacred crest of the Hilt clan. Trembling in pure terror, she swore he was spouting absolute crazy talk, sobbing that she had zero clue about any demons or royal bloodlines. Lavis crushed her wrist just a fraction tighter, growling a chilling warning. If she wanted to walk out of here in one piece, she had better start spilling. The sheer murderous intent radiating from his eyes made her violently shudder. For a fleeting, horrifying second, she could have sworn massive, jagged horns cast a shadow right behind her. Heart pounding out of her chest, the word demon slipped from her quivering lips. Lavis viciously barked at her to speak up and stop mumbling. Breaking down completely, she finally surrendered, crying out that she genuinely had absolutely no idea what that cursed symbol. Between choked sobs, she revealed that a woman named Jin Ji forced it on her, claiming anyone who wanted to run with their underground crew had to get branded. Jin Ji even hooked her up with some exclusive weight loss capsules, swearing they would melt the pounds right off her. Hearing this, a heavy shadow instantly fell across Lavis's face. The faint aroma wafting off this girl struck a terrifyingly familiar chord. He knew that scent. He had breathed it in long ago back in the demon realm, and suddenly a massive flood of buried memories came crashing down on him. Flashing back to his reckless youth, Lavis had... As they plunged deeper into the pitch-black abyss, sheer paranoia began eating away at his companion. The kid kept whining about trespassing into a highly classified zone, pleading for them to bail before they got busted. But Lavis merely shot back a cocky grin, mercilessly roasting his pal for acting like such a massive wimp. Flushing red with embarrassment, he swore he just wanted to dodge the elder's brutal wrath. Tucking his hands behind his head without a care in the world, Lavis casually dared him to hit the road then. Yet, despite shaking in his boots, the other boy refused to budge. He knew damn well Lavis would... After an agonizing, endless climb downward, the duo finally hit rock bottom. A suffocating dead silence choked the gloomy hallway. He sensed a bizarre presence lurking nearby. Sprawling right out in front of them lay a colossal, hidden vault. Smacked dead in the center rested a motionless figure. Pure panic seized his buddy, frantically stammering about what the hell they had just stumbled upon. But Lavis, he just strutted straight toward it, absolutely fearless. Creeping closer, the gruesome truth hit them. The rotting corpse belonged to Jeremy Hilt, or whatever was left of the guy. Bizarre petals were literally sprouting out of his exposed flesh. Driven by twisted curiosity, Lavis squatted down, casually extending his hand to pluck one of the blooms. His companion shrieked in sheer desperation, begging him not to lay. The exact second Lavis aggressively yanked the plant free by its roots, a nauseating wave of rotten decay instantly flooded the air. Cowering behind Lavis's back, the terrified kid could only gawk as the freshly torn... Pure terror gripped his chest as the grim reality finally clicked. They had just stumbled upon the devouring flowers, a terrifying parasite designed to eat victims alive from the inside out. Fast forward to the present, and Lavis recognized that exact same rotten stench clinging to the girl. Shaking uncontrollably in her hospital bed, the terrified victim... But Lavis completely ignored her, keeping his cold gaze locked on the window instead. Hanging upside down from a nearby branch, a pitch-black bat kept its unblinking eyes glued to his every move. Lavis instantly recognized the creature as another demonic familiar, acting as a spy for a master miles away. From the shadows, the beast's owner grinned, knowing their paths would cross. Stepping out of the hospital, Lavis made a beeline straight for Jinji's underground tattoo studio. Standing before the gloomy basement doors, a million theories raced through his brain. A fragile human marked with the Hilt clan crest, reeking of those flesh-eating blossoms. That was Meanwhile, down in the grimy underground corridor, a group of street thugs strolled along, tossing Xion's name around. One punk openly questioned why their boss, Young Mu, was so obsessed with some random high school kid. His buddy scoffed, clarifying that Young Mu could not care less about the boy. He only wanted the kid's mysterious ass. Suddenly, a thug whipped out a bizarre, bright blue candy, chuckling about how modern street gangs used crazy advanced technology now. The moment they spotted the strange treat, the crew stiffened up in sheer panic. They frantically ordered him to spit out the blue bow, warning that the experimental drug packed some nasty, unpredictable side effects. Another guy nervously brought up the horrific fate of the girl who swallowed one just yesterday, but the arrogant punk just cackled, brushing off the warnings because he only cared about getting a sick high. Right then, Lavis emerged from the shadows. Boom! That foul stench slammed into his senses all over again. A nauseating cocktail of demonic aura and the infamous Hilt clan. The thugs instantly froze the second they saw him. With ice in his veins, Lavis casually asked if they got their ink from Jinji too. Smirking, the blue candy addict mocked him, wondering if this scrawny brat was another one of her little pals. Then the punk disrespectfully slapped Lavis on the cheek, barking at the boy to show some manners to his superiors. That one pathetic slap made Lavis's blood absolutely boil. Without missing a beat, he swatted the hand aside and planted a devastating hook straight into the guy's jaw, dropping him cold. The rest of the crew erupted into total outrage, screaming to know who sent this kid. Rather than wasting breath, Lavis buried his fist into another thug's face, launching the guy backward across the concrete. A third goon shrieked an avalanche of curses, sprinting headfirst into the danger zone. But Lavis smoothly sidestepped the sloppy rush and delivered a brutally precise counter. The attacker crashed down, howling in sheer agony. Panicking wildly, the final lackey whipped out a jagged blade and Lavis executed a lightning-fast spin kick, slamming his heel into the thug's skull to put him right to sleep. Brushing himself off, he coldly demanded Jinji's exact location. Out of nowhere, the first guy he knocked out slowly dragged himself back to his feet, but something was horribly twisted. His eyeballs practically popped out of his skull, and thick saliva dripped from his jaws like a rabid beast. Lavis narrowed his gaze, genuinely caught off guard. Fueled by a massive, violent spike in demonic energy, the mutated thug launched himself forward like a bloodthirsty monster. Lavis instantly put the pieces together. That strange blue candy had violently mutated the man's physical power. He leaped back to dodge the furious assault, but his boot snagged on an unconscious body, completely throwing off his balance. The deranged freak instantly pounced on him, winding up a colossal punch to smash his skull in. For the very first time since stepping foot in the human realm, Lavis let out a nervous curse. Meanwhile, buried in a secret underground vault, Jinji stood trembling before the syndicate's true mastermind, Young Mu. She bowed her head, stammering out terrified apologies because Xion had not delivered the crucial app yet. One of her top guys desperately jumped in, swearing they had threatened the boy, much clearer this time, guaranteeing the app would be done soon. Young Mu aggressively rubbed his temples in sheer frustration, coldly pointing out their exact same empty promises from last week. To make matters worse, some ghost had been snatching their precious blue bow stash right from under their noses. Right beside Jinji, a completely stripped, bawling his eyes out as he practically begged for his life. Hot tears flooded his cheeks while he choked out endless promises, swearing he would never screw up like that again. Young Mo fixed his dead gaze on the vibrant blue blossoms resting in a nearby vase, casually plucking a single stem. The entire room dropped into a suffocating silence as he strolled toward the trembling thief with chilling composure. Panic flashed across the face of the bleeding man as the grim reality of his fate, thrashing his head from side to side in pure hysteria. But the face of young Mo remained perfectly blank. Without a single blink of hesitation, he plunged the jagged stalk straight into the socket of the terrified man. A solitary tear slid down his face, quickly washed away by the crimson spilling from the destroyed socket. Standing nearby, even Jinji recoiled, her face turning pale at the sheer brutality of the execution. The broken thief let out one last pathetic whimper for mercy. Young Mo completely tuned it out, mercilessly sinking a second stalk deep into his flesh. Crimson painted the walls as raw, agonizing shrieks ripped through the heavy air, ending only when the mangled body finally crumpled to the ground. He lay there, violently spasming and unimaginable. Wiping his hands, young Mo coldly declared that his syndicate simply did not hand out second chances. He let the silence stretch, demanding that every single person in the room burn that brutal. Slowly pivoting his icy stare toward Jinji, he asked if they were on the exact same page. Gulping down the massive lump in her throat, she frantically nodded. Her boss shot back a frigid command, demanding she cut the pathetic excuses and deliver the finished soft. Too petrified to even meet his terrifying gaze, she offered a shaky, barely audible confirmation. The absolute second she slipped out the door, Jinji began frantically dialing the number for Xion. Her trembling fingers fumbled with the screen, screaming into the receiver that they were completely out of time. Miles away, Xion was glued to his glowing monitor, desperately hammering out endless walls of code in total isolation. When his ringtone finally shattered the silence, he hesitated before answering, only to be greeted by a completely unexpected voice. It was Lavis. The man nonchalantly explained that he initially planned to dig into the situation solo, but the neighborhood thugs were not exactly eager to share their secrets. Totally lost, Xion demanded to know what on earth was going on. In response, Lavis casually dropped the name of Jinji, asking if they were acquainted. The sheer mention of her name sent a jolt of absolute panic straight through the coder, who practically screamed to know how he found her. Lavis simply shrugged off the tone, mentioning he caught a glimpse of her caller ID on the phone earlier. He then smoothly asked for her home address to go verify a few things in person. The anxiety radiating from Xion skyrocketed as he frantically questioned the motives behind this sudden manhunt. Did those massive idiots actually manage to drag him into this entire nightmare too? Lavis swiftly corrected him, stating no one forced his hand. He walked right into the fire himself, because he demanded real answers. He revealed he was currently pacing around inside the quiet tattoo parlor of Jinji, but the artist had practically vanished. Mid-conversation, the eyes of Lavis locked onto a feline perched incredibly awkwardly on the nearby stairs. The very second his piercing gaze landed on it, the furry creature visibly recoiled. Back in the apartment, Xion was already violently throwing on his jacket, sprinting for the door while screaming at Lavis not to touch. The line went dead with a sharp click before Lavis could even get a single word out. Pocketing his device, Lavis slowly pivoted back to the peculiar feline. Every single movement it made screamed that something was horribly off. This was not a real animal. It was a bizarre imposter wearing fur. Piqued by sheer curiosity, he casually strolled over to the creature. Right as his fingers locked firmly onto its scruff, he casually asked if it could comprehend his words. The furball let out a pathetic, violently trembling meow. His voice dropped into a bone-chilling command, demanding a proper response. Shaking out of its tiny mind, the beast instantly broke into completely fluent human speech. The interrogation started immediately. He rattled off the strange stalkers from before, a rat, then a bat, and now this pathetic feline. Stuttering in absolute dread, the creature confessed she was an undercover watcher, dispatched straight from the... Her sole directive was to keep a hidden eye on damned inmates banished to the mortal realm, which explained the endless stalking. Lavis dramatically narrowed his eyes, radiating pure skepticism. The dark energy radiating off her was almost laughably weak. He openly mocked whether she even qualified as a real fiend. The panicked spy stammered out a question, begging to know how her disguise failed so miserably. Lavis simply smirked, pointing out she was about as subtle as a neon sign. Even at this exact moment, she was totally blowing her cover, awkwardly balancing on her two hind legs like a toddler, instead of acting like a natural predator. Letting out a heavy sigh, he quickly realized trying to squeeze out any more intelligence from this amateur would be a colossal waste of time. Instead, he channeled a spark of mana, demanding the observer's puppet master show his face through the psychic link. Instantly, the feline's pupils glazed over, hollow and lifeless. Miles away in the abyssal underworld, Lavis, sensing the magical surge, he chuckled, confessing he knew Lavis would crack the puzzle sooner or later, just not this damn fast. The second his shadowy silhouette materialized through the feline host, Lavis snapped, calling him a moron, and interrogating him if this entire nightmare was his doing yet again. Shrugging it off, his buddy teased, wondering why Lavis always treated him like garbage despite their tight bond. He also casually asked what brand of absolute pandemonium Lavis intended to unleash this time around. But Lavis saw right through the act. The fiend was playing dumb, clear as day. Realizing an argument would lead nowhere, he let out an exhausted breath, shifting gears to ask why the mortal realm felt completely foreign compared to his memories. And the biggest mystery of all, how the hell was his mana still flowing? Based on the ancient banishment codes, convicted exiles were supposed to be stripped. Unfazed, the demon brushed it off, stating loopholes existed in every system, promising Lavis would piece the puzzle together soon enough. Wasting no time, Lavis pivoted the interrogation straight to those. Their sickening sweet aroma was suffocating the mortal realm. He had crossed paths with those nightmarish petals back in the underworld decades ago, and even among hellspawn, those cursed plants were strictly taboo. Catching that grim detail, the smirking fiend's face hardened into a deadpan glare. He confessed that underworld elites were already aware that surviving rats from the Hilt Syndicate had breached Earth's defense. It turned out the abominations engineered by the Hilt bloodline were vastly tougher to eradicate than anyone predicted. Scowling, Lavis demanded to know if this entire catastrophe traced back to those Hilt bastards once more. Did their toxic legacy actually outlive their supposed massacre? The demon merely chuckled under his breath, clarifying that the mortal dimension had evolved into something unrecognizable. From his twisted perspective, Earth had rotted into a fertile trench of shadowy plots and underground deceit. Simply put, Lavis crashed the party at the absolute perfect moment to stir the pot. Furious, Lavis barked for more intel, but right as he opened, the psychic feed violently snapped. Blinking back to reality, the tiny feline stared up at him with shivering dread, while Lavis sharply clicked his tongue, utterly pissed off. Cut to Jinji frantically spamming Xion's phone with zero luck. Boiling with rage and blind panic, she shrieked at the screen, swearing she would ruin him if he dared to dodge her calls. Finally snapping, she aggressively punched in a different contact. The guy picking up was Jong-jun, casually chilling out in the cyberlab. Jinji barked lethal orders at him, demanding he rally the crew and storm the main headquarters, because they were hunting Xion down with their own bare hands. Back in the alley, Lavis glared down at the trembling furball, a realization hitting him. If she genuinely functioned as a watcher, she had to be a walking encyclopedia. Pumping her little chest out, the cat smugly bragged that tracking down fugitives across the mortal realm was her absolute masterpiece. Without missing a beat, Lavis commanded her to drop the disguise and show her real face. The tiny spy froze, wide-eyed and paralyzed. Glaring daggers, Lavis growled, asking if he needed to rip the illusion off himself. Trembling in sheer terror, she scrambled to obey, clasping her tiny paws together. As a blinding flash of raw energy instantly. Seconds later, the brilliant glow faded, leaving behind a pint-sized demon girl sporting anxious eyes and an incredibly shaky smile. Lavis sized her up in one sweeping glance, brutally declaring that she looked pathetically fragile. But hey, since his underworld associate personally dispatched her, she had to pack some hidden utility. He demanded her name. Ducking her gaze in shame, the little imp whispered that she was completely nameless. Without batting an eye, Lavis slapped the title Street on her, purely because he scraped her off the pavement outside. In a shocking twist, the tiny creature beamed with explosive joy at claiming her very first title, showering him with desperate, bubbling gratitude. Ignoring the affection, Lavis commanded Street to spill every single scrap of intel she held regarding the human realm. Across the concrete jungle, Xion bolted like a madman through the crowded pavement, silently praying he could intercept With every pounding footstep, agonizing flashbacks clawed at his mind. He remembered crushing that software coding tournament, riding the ultimate high because his grueling grind finally struck gold, only for his victory lap to be violently hijacked seconds later. The moment those shady thugs cornered him outside the building, Jinji's eyes locked right onto him. She scoffed, mocking the absolutely pitiful chunk of change he'd won as a prize. With a flick of her wrist, she ordered her goons to toss him into the back of their van. Xion shrieked in terror as they violently shoved him inside. Inside the hideout, he finally came face to face with young Mu. The boss didn't say a word, just gestured toward a seat piled high with 50 million won in cold, hard cash, and demanded to buy his software outright. But Xion shot the offer down instantly, insisting the program was never up for grabs. Young Mu just sat there, letting the silence stretch, before calmly stating that he knew Xion would say exactly that. That chilling reaction sent more shivers down Xion's spine than the mountain of bills ever could. Now sprinting frantically down the street to keep Lavis totally out of this mess, he slammed face first into a massive figure, blocking his only escape route. Stumbling back and stammering an apology, Xion glanced up and felt his blood run entirely. Sung-jun towered over him. The bruiser flashed a wicked smirk, chuckling that they didn't even have to hunt him down, since the little rat scurried right into their trap. Xion whipped his head around, spotting Jinji marching up with a squad of gangsters. Absolute murder flashed in her eyes. After snatching him off the street, Jinji hauled him all the way down into a damp underground bunker, tossing him violently into a heavily secured server room. Glaring down at him, she spat out his new reality. His one and only purpose was to glue his eyes to the screen and run that app. Xian scrambled to his knees, begging her to just hold on and listen, but she ruthlessly shut him up. She leaned in, warning him that her crew was tracking his every twitch through the glass outside, so he'd better scrap any heroic escape plans. The massive steel door slammed shut behind her with a sickening thud. Slumping against the floor, the horrifying reality crushed Xian. His life. Out in the hallway, Jinji and Songjun peered at their prisoner through the reinforced observation window. Seongjun scoffed, doubting this kid was actually a mastermind developer. To him, the guy looked completely clueless and painfully slow. Jinji fired back, making it clear that according to the boss himself, the entire Blue Bow syndicate would crumble without Xian's software. Scratching his head, Songjun asked if the program was seriously named I Am Here. Because honestly, he thought that was the dumbest title he had ever heard. Back inside, a beefy thug slammed Xian down into a rolling chair and slapped the back of his skull, barking at him to get his fingers moving. Trembling uncontrollably, Xian booted up the system. From its slick logo and innocent interface, the thing just looked like a standard swipe-to-meet dating app for finding locals. But the heavy door swung open, revealing young Mu, who strolled in to break down its true, sinister purpose. According to the Kingpin, this little dating tool was the beating heart of their Phase 1 was simple. They would harvest an ocean of personal data from every unsuspecting user. Once they dominating the entire market would be an absolute breeze. Using the live location tracking, they could effortlessly flood the streets with Songjun's eyes lit up, greedily realizing they were finally going to push their stash on a colossal, city-wide scale. Gazing coldly at the single blue candy resting in his palm, young Mu gave a slow nod of approval. Soon their poison would infect the entire globe. Within 24 hours, the application absolutely blew up online, going wildly viral in a flash. Completely hooked by the promise of a massive 30,000 won cash reward, dropped right into their accounts for every... That kind of quick cash drew greedy teens in like moths to a flame. Kids were even bullying and cornering their classmates just to force them to sign up. And to sweeten the deal, every new user snagged a free bottle of diet pills, branded as Blue Bow, right at the door. The splash page boasted that the supplements were perfectly certified and totally healthy. Obviously, that was a flat-out lie. By nightfall, the underground lair erupted into a massive celebration as the crew cheered their instant victory. Jinji smirked at the skyrocketing user count glowing on her screen, while Songjun shook his head in awe, admitting that young Mu was an absolute mastermind. But then the image of her wrecked tattoo parlor flashed in Jingi's mind. Furious, she demanded to know if her crew had dragged the bastard responsible into the light yet. One of her thugs shifted uncomfortably, stammering that the security footage captured something a literal bat had hijacked the lens. Scowling in disbelief, she snatched the monitor to check the tapes herself. Lo and behold, a winged creature hung right in front of the lens, deadlocking its gaze with the camera and entirely eclipsing the crime scene. On the second feed, a giant rat blocked the shot. Jingi spat out a string of curses, absolutely baffled by this ridiculous freak occurrence. Right then, Songjun's phone buzzed, and he quickly reported that the latest massive shipment of Blue Bow just hit the docks. Cut to Lavis, strolling back from campus with Citri trailing right behind him. Out of nowhere, he caught her pathetically wiggling, wedged halfway through a tiny crack in a brick wall. Flushed bright red, she frantically squeaked an apology and morphed back into her human shape, shyly confessing she might have packed on a few extra pounds lately. Ignoring the excuse, Lavis cut straight to the chase, demanding the results of yesterday's intelligence gathering. Puffing out her chest with sudden pride, Citri bragged about her, claiming she finally cracked the mystery behind the Blue Bow drug. The day before, Lavis had caught a faint whiff of the candy and guessed it carried the stench of devouring flower. Her digging confirmed his deadly suspicion. These sinister blossoms only sprout after draining the life out of a living host, making it physically impossible to cultivate them without fresh meat. The monstrous plant was supposed to be completely wiped out, eradicated even in the darkest corners, which left one massive, terrifying question. How did mere mortals get their hands? Citri revealed that the syndicate smuggled Blue Bow onto the streets by masking it as harmless diet pills and wellness supplements. But the production labs were buried so deep in the shadows that even demonic senses struggled to untangle the recipe's exact origins. Lavis shot her a glacial glare, asking if that meant she wasted her time and brought him absolute garbage. Flailing her hands in pure panic, Citri desperately backpedaled. She swore she had a solid lead, since the tainted candy exploded in popularity. Massive tidal waves of the product were flooding the city's black market. By tracking the lingering stench of demonic mana practically oozing off the supply chain, they could pinpoint. Annoyed Lavis forcefully flicked her forehead, scolding her for not dragging him straight to the location in the first place. Fidgeting nervously, Citri muttered that his demonic rival commanded her to stand down and wait. His gaze sharpened into daggers as he cornered her, demanding to know if she had been snitching on his every single move to Bambi since day one. Trembling, Citri bowed over and over, crying out that a pathetic lesser demon like her had no choice but to follow orders from two supreme masters. Lavis didn't hesitate. He dropped a brutal ultimatum right then and there. Pick a side. Who held her leash, him or Bambi? Citri went completely rigid. Choosing between two monstrously powerful entities was practically a death sentence. But Lavis leaned in, offering a chillingly calm promise. If she pledged her soul, he would personally shatter her limits, elevating her far above her pathetic lesser status forever. The second those words hit her ears, Citri's hesitation vanished. She straightened her spine, adopting the graceful posture of demonic nobility, dropped to one knee, and vowed eternal, unshakable loyalty to Lavis Vindica. A wicked smirk spread across Lavis's face. He sealed the terrifying pact by resting a heavy hand atop her head. The absolute Bambi's telepathic leash snapped into a million pieces. Leagues away in the blistering depths of the underworld, Bambi roared in fury, realizing his spy had just been snatched right out from under his nose. Back on Earth, Lavis flashed a triumphant grin to the sky. Later that exact night, the newly forged duo hunted the thick, toxic residue of magical energy straight to the heart of the drug ring. Their tracking led them straight to a colossal, gloomy dockyard, stacked high with rusted shipping containers. Shivering in the shadows, Citri whispered that the sheer density of dark mana radiating from the steel boxes was practically suffocating. Wasting zero time, Lavis marched up, fully intending to rip the nearest crate wide open. But Citri frantically pointed out the heavy-duty chains and massive steel padlocks securing. Without skipping a beat, Lavis handled the obstacle in the most brutally efficient way imaginable. He drove his fists straight through the heavy chains, obliterating them on impact. As the colossal metal doors swung wide, a stomach-turning stench of the interior was jammed floor to ceiling with endless crates, every single one pulsing with a vile, demonic aura. Street swallowed hard, stammering out a question. Was this entirely Blue Bow? Scanning the yard, sheer dread washed over them as they spotted dozens of identical shipping containers looming in the shadows. Taking in the terrifying scale of the stockpile, Lavis felt a long-buried memory from the demon realm claw its way back to the surface. Centuries ago, he had clashed against his uncle Varkan along the jagged edge of a colossal precipice. Mid-fight, Varkan sneered, taunting Lavis for his staggering arrogance, while still fighting like a fragile, helpless kid. Lavis spat back a furious string of curses, but his uncle merely threw his head back and cackled. With a chilling smile, Varkan declared, unleashing a devastating strike. Varkan blasted him clean over the jagged edge. Plummeting down into the bottomless void, Lavis tore his throat out. Echoing from above, Varkan's cruel laughter chased him down, demanding to know if such a pathetic demise was truly how the legendary Lavis Vindica intended to go out. Seconds later, Lavis slammed brutally into the cavern floor, gasping and groaning in absolute agony. Varkan touched down a moment later, still dripping with condescension. Suddenly the mockery died on his uncle's lips. Staring into the gloom, Varkan went completely rigid. Lavis tracked his gaze, and his blood ran cold. Sprawled out before them was a mountainous heap of slaughtered demons, their corpses entirely consumed by parasitic blooms. The cadavers were mangled and hollowed out, serving as fleshy soil for the grotesque flora erupting straight from their muscle and bone. Releasing a heavy, exhausted breath, Varkan muttered that they had finally uncovered the monster's hidden breeding ground. Staring at the nightmarish stash inside the modern warehouse, Lavis recalled the dark, ancient lore surrounding these devouring blossoms. Eons ago, when the universe violently ripped light and shadow into warring factions, freakish entities were born, things that belonged to neither domain. Caught in the cosmic crossfire, sprouting from the mutilated corpses of butchered angels and shattered demons, an enigmatic seedling took root. Forged at the very dawn of existence, it was a predator wrapped in petals, craving absolutely nothing but pure annihilation. It hungered for endless flesh, relentlessly engineering the total collapse of entire realms. On that fateful day, Lavis and Varkin systematically incinerated every single tainted corpse and parasitic weed they could find. Down in that pitch-black chasm, Lavis had been... Street had even mentioned earlier that the reigning tyrant of the demonic underworld supposedly scoured the entire globe right after desperately trying to scorch every last lingering spore. So how the hell were they violently resurfacing in such massive numbers? Dropping his voice, Lavis revealed a dark truth. These ravenous blooms didn't originate from hell. They were native to the human. Unlike the absolute purity of heaven or the utter despair of the demon realm, the mortal plane sat dead center, a volatile cocktail of blinding light and pitch. It claimed allegiance to no one, effectively transforming it into the ultimate incubator for unchecked corruption. According to ancient mortal folklore, mankind had allegedly... But standing here right now, it was glaringly obvious that those legends were complete garbage. And if this botanical plague was simultaneously erupting across both the underworld and the mortal plane, then someone operating in the shadows was deliberately orchestrating their revival. Just as Lavis and Street stood before the gaping container, a blinding flashlight beam violently pierced the darkness, hitting them square in the back. The duo whipped around. Squinting through the glare, a gang enforcer sneered, barking out that he was wondering what kind of rat was scurrying around. But the second his eyes locked onto Lavis's face, his smug grin completely vanished. Thrilled by the discovery, he hollered over his shoulder for Jinji, screaming that the suicidal punk from the tattoo joint had walked right into their trap. Street immediately zeroed in on the imposing woman stepping out of the shadows, whispering frantically to Lavis that this was the mastermind Jinji in the flesh. Scowling in pure annoyance, Jinji stepped up and demanded to know who the hell this guy thought he was. First, he completely wrecks her parlor, and now he somehow sniffs out their hidden base of operations. Lavis completely brushed off her hostility. Ice cold, he simply looked her dead in the eyes and asked if she was the one pulling the strings behind this entire syndicate. Smirking with supreme arrogance, Jinji proudly confessed that she was the boss, sarcastically challenging him to see exactly what he was going to do. Lavis shot a disgusted glare at the towering crates of blue bow. He scoffed, demanding to know if she had any idea what kind of vile garbage actually went into her product. Jinji flashed a wicked smirk, teasingly asking if he was just trying to swipe their corporate secrets. Letting out a heavy sigh, Lavis brushed her off, making it perfectly clear he couldn't care less about pathetic human enterprises. Still, something about this whole setup made his skin crawl, and walking away just didn't sit right with him. That struck a nerve. Jinji whipped around to face her goons, viciously snapping at them for always botching her operations. She didn't hold back, practically spitting as she reminded the thugs exactly what young Mu would do to them if they screwed this up. Digging into her coat, she whipped out a handful of blue bow capsules, tossing them to the pavement like scraps to starving street dogs. Instantly, the thugs' eyes went... They practically drooled, asking if the stash was actually on the house, but Jinji just shot them an icy glare, barking at them to shut up and swallow. While the grunts furiously shoved the pills down their throats, Lavis muttered to Street, warning her to stay out of sight so she wouldn't drag him down in the crossfire. The drug hit their bloodstreams in mere seconds. Thick red veins bulged across their eyeballs as their muscles convulsed in sick, erratic spasms. Leveling a finger straight at Lavis, Jinji shrieked the tossing the wrappers aside, the brain-dead thugs stampeded forward like a pack of rabid wolves. Lavis just shook his head, muttering about what absolute humanity really was, a breed of arrogant fools. They would blindly swallow literal poison without a second thought, completely oblivious to the... By now, the sheer volume of dark, demonic aura choking the warehouse was suffocating. Deep within him, Lavis felt his own suppressed magic flaring up, surging with an unprecedented violent intensity. The first junkie lunged, slashing wildly with a rusted blade, but Lavis casually slipped past the steel, punishing the fool. Without missing a beat, a second thug swarmed in, delivering a heavy roundhouse to his ribs. Lavis instantly neutralized the threat, pivoting fiercely to rush his next target. Ducking under a sloppy haymaker, he launched a brutal uppercut, lifting the goon off his feet and launching him across the concrete. But the atmosphere quickly shifted. This mutated batch of blue bow had jacked their strength to monstrous levels. Out of nowhere, a massive pair of arms locked around Lavis from behind, right as another bruiser bulldozed him into the dirt. Lavis spat a curse as the crew's heavyweight slammed a brutal knee straight into his gut, sparking a ruthless, dogpiling frenzy. They cackled like maniacs, raining down a relentless barrage of fists. Peeking from the shadows, Street trembled in panic, while Gingy soaked up the carnage with a sadistic ear-to-ear grin. Taking the hits, Lavis quickly calculated the raw power upgrade. Downing a heavier dose of the drug was actively supercharging their muscles. Shielding his head from the merciless beatdown, a risky tactic flashed through his brain. Wrenching his body sideways, Lavis muscled his way toward the busted. He unleashed a desperate strike, shattering one of the wooden supply boxes into splinters. Snatching a massive bag of raw blue powder, he ripped it open, blasting a thick cloud of the chemical directly into their screaming faces. The thugs instantly doubled over, violently gagging and coughing up their lungs as the dust invaded their air. In the chaos, Lavis accidentally sucked a lungful of the toxic haze. The putrid, rotting stench immediately hit the back of his throat, nearly making him vomit. But then, the unthinkable kicked in. The overwhelming tsunami of raw, corrupted malice, radiating from the dust, triggered his dormant magic, making it flare up with terrifying hostility. By the time the coughing goons finally looked up, Lavis was a totally different beast. He exploded forward with blinding, nightmarish speed. The closest thug folded instantly, knocked out cold by a savage, skull-rattling jab to the face. Pivoting away from a blind swing, Lavis snatched the next guy's ankle, slamming his body into the concrete with spine-snapping force. Without a shred of mercy, he drove his heel straight through the man's kneecap, totally pulverizing the joint. Furious, the towering Goliath of the gang roared, barreling toward him like a freight train. But Lavis was already a step ahead. He planted a devastating kick into the giant's gut, phasing behind him like a ghost to lock onto his massive shoulders. With raw, explosive power, he suplexed the titan backward, cratering him into the floor with an impact that made the whole Gingy stood frozen, her jaw dropping at the absolute carnage. How the heck was a single teenager wiping out an entire crew solo? Amidst the wreckage, Lavis casually rose to his feet, locking his gaze straight onto. The second those dead, piercing eyes met hers, a wave of pure terror violently washed over her, something she hadn't felt in ages. In that chilling moment, she knew she wasn't looking at a human being. She was staring at an absolute monster. Meanwhile, miles away across the glowing city limits, a high-stakes ballet tournament was officially underway. A prodigy named Yura glided flawlessly across the stage, while her mother, Kang Han-ju, beamed with pride watching the live broadcast straight from her living room sofa. She confidently bragged that with moves like those, her precious girl was destined to headline the elite Venus Ballet Company. Out of nowhere, the front door swung open. Young Mo strolled right in, trailing an uninvited goon. Hanju snapped, instantly furious, screaming at the top of her lungs about how they dared to break into her private home. Unfazed, young Mo smoothly set a massive jar packed with glowing Blue Bow sweets right onto her coffee table. He smirked, noting his team figured they owed her some VIP hand-delivered service. Swallowing hard, Hanju shot a nervous glare at the glass container. She stammered out, questioning if this was the exact same batch as the last one. Brushing off her panic, the smug dealer guaranteed supreme quality, boasting that his inner circle micromanaged every single step from cooking the stuff all the way to... Despite the pep talk, she looked absolutely sick to her stomach. Young Mo let out a dark chuckle, mocking her sudden crisis of conscience, right after shoving lethal doses of experimental junk down her own kid's throat. Right on cue, the camera cut back to Yura, completely wired out of her mind on the Blue Bow. Her rhythm skyrocketed, turning sickeningly fast and razor-sharp. She ripped through endless pirouettes, nailing gravity-defying stunts back to back. But as the routine dragged on, the illusion violently shattered. Saliva slipped down her chin. Her pupils rolled deep into her skull, and violent tremors wrecked her frame. Watching the screen, young Mo casually noted that Mom Dearest had gotten way too greedy, way too fast, casually wondering just how many pills she had shoved into her little girl. Without warning, Yura locked up, mid-spin, her limbs twisting into a gruesome, total panic hijacked Hanju's brain. She shrieked at the television, desperately begging her kid to stop moving, as if her voice could somehow punch through the glass. And a gut-wrenching explosive crack echoed through the entire auditorium. Yura's legs snapped completely backwards. Her frail body slammed into the hardwood floor, instantly going dead still. The crowd immediately lost their minds, shrieking in pure horror as security guards scrambled onto the spotlight. Tears violently spilled down Hanju's face. She wildly lunged at young Mo, sobbing and screaming that he had sworn this garbage was completely safe. Ice cold, he quickly set the record straight. The stuff was perfectly harmless, but only if the user actually followed the strict dosage limits. Now, thanks to her greed, the poor dancer's career was officially dead in the water, unless she kept funneling Bluebo into her system. He brutally laid out the facts. From this moment on, her kid was hopelessly hooked for the rest of her miserable life. Horrified, Hanju stared at the glowing jar like it was a ticking bomb, while the dealer ruthlessly hammered in that the addiction was already set in stone. But right before he could drop another truth bomb, Hanju let out a soul-crushing wail, ripping at her own hair in absolute blinding. Out of nowhere, Young Mo's cell began to buzz. The caller ID read Jinji. Annoyed, he swiped to accept the video chat, barking out a demand. But it wasn't his right-hand woman staring back at him. The bloodied face of Lavis leaned directly into the camera lens, and with dead-eyed calm, the kid asked if he was the mastermind cooking up the Bluebo trash. Young Mo's eyes practically bulged out of his skull. Click. The screen went pitch black. Sweating bullets, the boss shot the weeping mother one last grim look. He muttered a quick apology, claiming a massive emergency had just blown up in his face. Cutting back to the wrecked warehouse, a trembling Jinji asked her captor why the hell people would willingly poison themselves with that toxic trash. Lavis just scoffed bluntly, stating that human beings were nothing but brainless, arrogant fools. People always walked around with this arrogant delusion that addiction was something that only happened to empty inside and completely hollow of any real conviction. They latched onto cheap highs and pathetic fantasies just to feel alive. A sudden rustle in the shadows caught Stit's attention, prompting her to urgently gesture toward the dense woods. Right on cue, Jinji hollered out Yang Mu's name with frantic enthusiasm. The man of the hour finally emerged from the pitch-black shadows, flanked by a squad of heavily armed goons. With ice in his veins, he casually questioned if Ravis was the one responsible for wrecking his tattoo joint. Ravis didn't miss a beat, flatly stating he couldn't care less about that trashy parlor. The only thing on his mind was uncovering exactly where this guy managed to score those devouring flowers. As far as Ravis was concerned, a bottom-feeding human shouldn't have possessed the power to get their hands on something so incredibly dangerous. The phrase, little human, struck a major nerve, causing a noticeable a silent realization washed over him, as he questioned if Ravis was actually playing for the same twisted team he flashback to his miserable childhood, trapped under the same roof as a deadbeat dad hooked on every narcotic under the sun. One fateful night, a young, withdrawal-ridden Yang Mu stumbled through the front door, screaming for his old man to cough up his next fix. Silence answered back. Frustrated by the lack of response, he viciously booted them. The cold body flopped over, revealing glassy, dead eyes staring blankly into the ceiling. Spitting a string of curses, Yang Mu quickly deduced that the pathetic old geezer had finally overdosed on the very garbage he worshipped. Boiling over with pure selfish rage, he rained kicks down on the lifeless corpse, shrieking about how his only drug hookup was now permanently gone. But then, out of nowhere, those dead eyes flared to life. Yang Mu froze the blood instantly draining from his face. With agonizing slowness, the decaying body dragged itself back up onto its own 2 feet. Except whatever was standing there wasn't his father. Something far more sinister had completely hijacked the hollow meat suit. The entity tilted its head calmly, asking if the boy felt any sorrow over losing his dad. Yang Mu just stared dead-eyed for a second, before brutally admitting he couldn't care less. Honestly, he was thrilled the dead weight had finally kicked the bucket. The only thing swimming around his drug-addled brain was figuring out how to score his next massive high. That ruthlessly cold answer brought a sickening sense of satisfaction to the creature. Revealing its demonic nature, the entity presented a bizarre-looking flower and commanded the boy to feed his own father's corpse to its hungry petals. In exchange for this gruesome meal, the demon promised to forge an unbreakable blood pact, guaranteeing Yang Mu everything his dark heart. There was just one deadly catch. If anyone dared to betray the devouring flower or resist its control, Yang Mu was bound. In return, the sheer power of their unholy contract would act as his absolute shield. For a brief, suffocating moment, Yang Mu just stared down at the mystical plant. Then a deeply unhinged grin crawled across his face. Without a single ounce of hesitation, he viciously plunged the flower straight into his dead father's chest. Snapping back to reality, Yang Mu locked eyes with Ravis, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he asked if he still looked like just another weak little human. That chilling shift in tone was a dead giveaway to Ravis. This guy was definitely hiding a massive ace up his sleeve. Smugly confirming those suspicions, Yang Mu proudly declared that his dark master had blessed him with a total rebirth. At that exact second, the final puzzle piece clicked into place. This absolute moron had actually sold his soul and inked a deal with a little. Rolling his wrist with an exhausted sigh, Ravis bluntly stated he didn't give a damn about whatever twisted cult this guy subscribed to, though he couldn't help but pity the fact that both Yang Mu and his demonic sugar daddy had hit such rock-bottom levels of pathetic. That stinging insult instantly shattered Yang Mu's calm facade, sending thick veins practically popped out of his forehead as he roared, furious that this arrogant brat had the guts to disrespect him to his face. Barking out orders like a madman, he commanded his surviving thugs to drag the kid back to him alive. Catching the cue, Stit silently slipped further into the shadows, knowing her By now, Ravis was completely past the point of casual irritation. Brawling endlessly with these drugged-out junkies was draining whatever little patience he had left, so he decided to wrap this pathetic circus up fast. Meanwhile, miles away, across the sprawling city, sirens blared as paramedics raced Yura to the ER. Beside her, her panicked mother was sobbing uncontrollably, completely paralyzed by fear. Meanwhile, shady drop-offs were happening nationwide. Teenagers everywhere were still linking. From the second that app went live, demand skyrocketed into absolute chaos. The stuff was tearing through high schools like a runaway freight train. Song Joon was practically buzzing, hyping up the crew that they would be locking down high rollers coast to coast in no time. One of the street thugs chimed in, asking if they were about to go fully international. Turns out, Young Mu had already carved out underground pipelines straight into China and Japan. The whole crew was gassing him up, acting like he was the next great underworld kingpin. Cut to the basement server room. Xian was locked inside, staring blankly at the app's exploding numbers, absolutely suffocating in his own guilt. With every tick of the clock, another kid fell into the blue bow trap. He was silently begging the universe for someone, anyone, to pull the plug on this nightmare. Back at the turf war, Lavis had already wiped the floor with the bulk of Young Mu's goons. Jinji just stared wide-eyed. She muttered that this absolute freak of nature couldn't possibly. She figured he had to be an enforcer from a rival syndicate. But Lavis just tilted his head, completely baffled by her logic, because petty human turf wars didn't mean a damn thing to a. Out of nowhere, Young Mu lunged. Lavis snapped into action, parrying the strike mid-air. But this wasn't some sloppy junkie. Young Mu was operating on a whole different frequency. Every single blow was lightning fast and deadly accurate. As Lavis dodged and weaved, he couldn't ignore the suffocating pitch-black aura bleeding off his opponent. "How the hell are you stopping me?" Young Mu snarled, his eyes wide with manic rage. He demanded to know if Lavis had stolen the blessing too. In his twisted mind, the power of Lord Bever was his and his alone. At the drop of that name, Lavis's eyes went dead cold. The puzzle pieces clicked. The flesh-eating blossoms, that stomach-churning rot, the dark corruption. This pathetic god Young Mu was bowing down to. Young Mu flinched, stunned that this kid knew the sacred name. But Lavis just let out a dark, mocking chuckle and scoffed, pointing out that out of all the horrific entities in the underworld, only a complete moron would worship a spineless bottom feeder like Bevor Hilt. That insult was the match in the powder keg. Young Mu absolutely snapped. He shrieked at Lavis to shut his mouth about the savior who rescued him. Lavis just flashed an icy smirk and taunted him. "How pathetic is your god now, scurrying around like a rat after tossing his own clan to the slaughter." "Shut up," Young Mu roared, spitting with fury that this trash wasn't even worthy of uttering Lord Bevor's name. His strikes grew wildly feral, turning into a reckless barrage. As Lavis deflected the flurry, his mind flashed back to the bloodbath. The day he personally wiped the Hilt family off the map. Out of that entire mass, Before was the only one who made it out, scurrying away like a pathetic coward. And now, that same gutless survivor was playing God in the human realm. Lavis internally mused, wondering what dark hole that rat was currently hiding in. Suddenly, Young Mu went totally feral. He hunched over, letting out a guttural, beast-like growl as a wave of rotting, corpse-like stench blasted through the air. Lavis instinctively clamped a hand over his nose, gagging at the foul odor. In a blur, Young Mu speared him to the concrete, shrieking that anyone who disrespected his master was going to end up in a body bag by his hands alone. He gripped Lavis's hair and drove his knee brutally into the teen's ribs over and over. He pinned the boy flat against the asphalt, unleashing a savage, relentless ground and pound. Lavis clenched his jaw, throwing his arms up to desperately shield his face from the onslaught. "Blue Bow is mine. Lord Bevor is mine," young Mu bellowed, completely unhinged. It clicked for Lavis. The dark aura had completely melted this idiot's brain. He wasn't holding back. He was out for blood. Watching from the shadows, the terrified student started sweating bullets, fully aware that Miho's fragile human vessel was already tearing at the seams, hitting its absolute physical. If they were back in the underworld, and Lavis had his full arsenal, he would have vaporized this punk in a heartbeat. But confined within this brittle mortal shell, just taking a single step was a lethal gamble. Millions of miles away, in the demon realm, Varkan and Banbei watched the brutal clash unfold through a mystical projection. Banbei noted that the parasitic blossom experiment had completely fused with young Mu's flesh. Despite having the crimson demon core embedded in his chest, Lavis remained hopelessly shackled to a fragile human form. If he took too much damage, he'd actually bleed out, and perishing before his banishment was lifted meant his soul would be annihilated for eternity. Yet Varkan merely flashed a relaxed smirk. He turned to his companion, asking if he knew what Lavis despised above all else in the universe. Banbei scoffed, pointing out how impossible it was to narrow it down when the guy literally loathed everything breathing. After all, the kid had a truly legendary, downright atrocious temper. Varkan let out a heavy breath, softly confessing that the boy took after him far more than anyone guessed. Then he dropped the real answer. Lavis was an absolute raging germaphobe. He was violently allergic to grime, decay, and vile stenches, hating them with a burning passion. Right on cue, Lavis snatched young Mu's incoming fist straight out of the air, freezing it in place. Quivering with pure, unfiltered disgust, he whispered how utterly repulsive this whole place was. The monster blinked in sheer bewilderment, but before he could process it, Lavis erupted into a blinding rage, roaring that he was going to vomit from the putrid stench radiating off him. In a heartbeat, the atmosphere shattered. Lavis squeezed his fist so intensely that his own muscles spasmed out of control. A primal wave of dread washed over young Mu, forcing him to stumble backward. Inch by inch, the demon lord rose to his feet. He locked his gaze onto his left palm, marveling at the sliver of power breaking through. The dark energy coursing through those veins finally pulsed with the unmistakable, terrifying might of Lavis Vindica. Paralyzed by sheer terror, the mutated beast refused to inch any closer. With an icy glare, Lavis stated that touching a walking pile of trash nauseated him, so he was going to finish this in one strike. In a flash of shadows, he blinked out of existence. He materialized right at young Mu's throat and delivered a skull-crushing hook that snapped the monster's neck back. Reeling from the brutal impact, the creature stumbled, desperately trying to comprehend this sudden, monstrous surge in power. Suri squealed with sheer delight as her master brutally dominated the battlefield. Locking eyes with his prey, Lavis chillingly reminded him that he was never human to begin with. Without missing a beat, he unleashed a devastating second blow, launching the beast flying backward through the air like a rag doll. Junji shrieked in absolute panic as young Mu frantically scrambled to his feet, screaming to know what kind of monster he was actually fighting. Like a phantom, Lavis materialized in front of him yet again. He coldly commanded the creature to shut his vile, contaminated mouth before driving a merciless uppercut deep into his gut, sending him rocketing up into the sky. Back in the demon realm, Banbei's jaw dropped in absolute disbelief. Varkan nonchalantly analyzed the situation, theorizing that the foul odor practically short-circuited the boy's severe germophobia. That unbearable revulsion acted as a trigger, snapping a chunk of his locked-away demonic instincts. Even if it was just a tiny drop of his original might, it provided the juice needed to temporarily shatter the physical limits of Miho's mortal vessel. Banbei remained completely stunned, even with the crimson core pumping through his chest. Channeling raw, pure demonic energy through a cursed human shell defied all known logic. But Varkan merely flashed a wickedly proud grin, reminding his companion that Lavis Vindica, things were far from normal. Because no matter the chaos, that absolute monster was still his own nephew. Meanwhile, inside the dusty warehouse, Levi utterly bulldozed young Mu straight through towering walls of Blue Bow cartons, before coldly advising the broken boy to count his lucky stars. The harsh reality was simple. Trapped in this current physical vessel, young Mu glared back, his eyes wide with pure, unfiltered shock. In his twisted mind, a chosen warrior, personally blessed by Lord Beaver, had no business tasting such a humiliating defeat. Then his gaze caught the scattered blue bow powder on the concrete floor. A sinister, knowing smirk slowly stretched across his bleeding lips. He lunged for a fresh carton, but before his fingertips could even brush the cardboard, Levi snatched his wrist in a vice grip. With a chilling glare, he dared him to try something that idiotic. Levi casually promised to shatter every bone in his body before letting him power up. Shifting his weight, he dropped into a battle stance. Clamping his right hand violently around his own left wrist, he locked the surging explosive energy radiating from his arm into place. Then he launched forward like a missile. Young Mu stood paralyzed in absolute terror right before Levi buried a catastrophic haymaker straight into his skull. The brutal momentum, magnified by his supporting arm, triggered a shockwave that launched young Mu soaring backward, crashing headfirst into a massive cargo crate of drugs. Instantly, a dead, chilling silence choked. Young Mu lay completely motionless in the wreckage. Pulling a crisp handkerchief from his pocket to mask his face, Levi mumbled under his breath that the sickening, foul stench had finally faded away. Meanwhile, buried deep underground in a claustrophobic control room, a boy stared intensely at the live application data, his fingers shaking uncontrollably. With every passing second, the user metrics skyrocketed at a terrifying pace, twisting his stomach into nauseating knots. This nightmare was never part of his plan. For Xian, high school had always been a toxic wasteland built entirely on lies. From day one, bonds forged in those suffocating classrooms were purely about surviving the food chain, rather than finding actual loyalty. Kids plastered on fake smiles pretending to worship the exact same peers they despised behind. Cowards actively tormented the defenseless outcasts, desperate to keep the crosshairs off their own backs. Every single person wore a thick mask just to make it through the day. That sickening reality was the sole reason he coded the software in the first place. He desperately craved a safe haven where broken souls could strip away the lies and forge genuine connections. A beacon of hope for lonely outcasts. He absolutely refused to let his creation become a black market for pushing literal poison. Reaching his breaking point, Xian made a final, drastic choice. His eyes ignited with fierce resolve as he slammed his fingers across the key. In a flash, blazing red alert signals flooded every single synced device in the building. Just outside the reinforced door, Song Jun and his thugs blinked in utter bewilderment. Catastrophic system failures violently flashed across all of their monitor screens. Fully aware of the hellfire about to drop, Xian and aggressively wedged it right under the steel doorknob, barricading the only entrance. The furious gangsters instantly swarmed the perimeter, violently pounding on the glass and kicking the door, roaring at him to unlock it. Completely tuning out their blood-curdling threat, Xian sprinted back to the glowing monitor and initiated the total wipeout of the software's source code. Out in the hallway, absolute panic gripped Song Jun, barking frantic orders at his crew to breach the barricade no matter what. A split second later, a deafening shatter violently ripped through the underground bunker. Song Jun had absolutely obliterated the reinforced glass with a thrown chair. The instant their boots hit the floor, a furious thug planted a devastating right hook straight into Cho Gi-hun's jaw, screaming his lungs out, roaring for an explanation about this betrayal. While a dazed Gi-hun writhed on the cold tiles, the rest of the mob frantically swarmed the terminal. The horrifying truth hit them like a freight train. He had actually flatlined the entire. Raw, sickening dread painted their faces pale. Song Jun, because if a psychotic boss like Young Mu found out about this colossal failure, they were all walking dead men. But there was one massive glare. Not a single one of these brainless street thugs had the slightest clue how to override the deletions. Xian gritted his teeth, absorbing the brutal blows raining down on him, with a single desperate thought burning in his mind. He just needed to survive until that damn app was wiped completely from existence, no matter the cost. Out of nowhere, his fingers brushed against a jagged, and he viciously sliced it right across one of the thug's legs. As the rest of the gang flinched back in sheer panic, the bruised boy scrambled to his feet and sprinted across the dimly lit room. Ripping a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall, he whipped around to face his attackers, screaming at the top of his lungs that this was his creation. Without hesitation, he yanked the pin and blasted the heavy cylinder. A massive cloud of thick, white chemical dust erupted, instantly choking the air and plunging the entire basement into blinding chaos. Using the smoky haze to buy himself a few precious seconds, Xian anxiously watched his screen, until finally, the app's deletion process successfully hit 100%. For a fleeting, breathless moment, a wave of profound relief washed over him as he stared, but dropping his guard for even a second proved to be a fatal mistake. Sungjun violently lunged out of the smoke, tackling him hard from behind, locking a vicious grip around his throat and slamming his skull against the cold floor. Blind with rage, the gang leader roared at his crew to find some rope and tie this little punk down right away. But the thick, swirling extinguisher dust made it practically impossible for anyone to see a damn thing. Pinning him down, Sungjun dug both of his hands deep into Xian's windpipe, squeezing with lethal force. The boy frantically clawed at his attacker's thick forearms as black spots danced across his vision. Was this pathetic struggle really his absolute limit? Was he really going to die in this grimy basement? Suddenly, an icy, spine-chilling voice sliced through the chaos from the shadows. "How dare you lay your filthy hands on my servant?" That terrifying tone made Sungjun freeze dead. A split second later, an agonizing shriek ripped through the air, forcing the terrified gang members to snap their heads toward the noise. As the white fog slowly cleared, a gruesome sight emerged. Lavis had Sungjun entirely by the hair, ruthlessly slamming his bloody face into the concrete over and over again. Freaking out, the thugs rushed in to save their boss, but Lavis bolted straight into their ranks like a bullet. A single devastating hook folded the first guy in half. A brutal follow-up strike instantly laid the second attacker out cold on the tiles. Glaring down at the battered crew, Lavis asked in a deadly whisper who the hell they thought they were messing with. He swore on his life that he would rather drop dead than let some lowlifes damage. Coughing for air, Xian stared up at his terrifying. Without warning, a flood of bittersweet memories washed over him. He flashed back to the day he timidly showed his newly coded app to Miho, awkwardly explaining its features. By utilizing real-time GPS tracking and community message boards, locals could easily link up chat securely and even throw together spontaneous study sessions. Miho's eyes had lit up with genuine awe, asking if Xian had actually built something this incredible, completely from scratch. Then, leaning in closer, Miho pointed directly at a conspicuous red eye and asked about its purpose. Back then, Xian had nervously rubbed the back of his neck before confessing the painful truth. Ever since Taewoo's crew violently dragged Miho off that last time, Xian had been driven crazy trying to find him, failing miserably to track down their hideout. That crushing sense of helpless guilt had eaten him alive. So he explicitly designed this hidden SOS feature. The moment anyone mashed that button, an encrypted distress beacon would instantly ping their closest, trusted friends. That way, if a nightmare like that ever repeated itself, Xian made a solemn vow to rush to his rescue, whether that meant calling in the cops or rallying a whole crew to fight. He promised Miho would never have to face the darkness alone again. Hearing that Miho had flashed a gentle, warm smile, whispering a heartfelt thank you, and promising to keep the app installed. Snapping back to reality, hot tears spilled down Xian's bruised face as he shakily raised his cracked phone toward, choking on his words, as he asked if the terrifying fighter had actually tracked him down using that exact. Looking into those fierce eyes, Xian instantly knew the signal had gone through. Completely overwhelmed by the flood of raw emotion, the battered boy broke down sobbing, pouring out endless words of gratitude to the one person who actually... Meanwhile, just outside the sketchy basement, Suri was wrestling to keep a tight grip on Jinji, while waiting for Lavis to wrap up his bloody business inside. Or, well, she was trying her absolute best to restrain her. Jinji was thrashing around like a wildcat, screaming at Suri to get her damn hands off. But the exact second Lavis finally stepped out from the underground shadows, Suri's attention flickered away for just one crucial heartbeat. That split-second distraction was all she needed. Jinji violently tore herself loose and made a mad dash for freedom. Street lunged forward to hunt her down, but Lavis calmly held up a hand. "Let her run," he ordered coldly, since she was completely useless to him now. He shifted his gaze to the dark, starry sky above, finding a shred of comfort in knowing the parasitic blooms lurking in the shadows had finally been turned to ash. Miles away, a raging inferno consumed the warehouse as swarms of sirens wailed through the night, drawing first responders to the chaos. Flashing red and blue lights illuminated the perimeter as baffled cops scrambled to piece together the absolute bloodbath left behind. Detective Park Yoon-han cautiously navigated the smoldering wreckage, freezing when he spotted a trail of battered, knocked-out thugs littered like broken rag dolls all across the nearby tree line. Far away from the blazing ruins, Lavis strolled casually back home, flanked by Shion and Street. Shion kept throwing utterly bewildered side glances at the newcomer because every alarm bell in his head was ringing. This mysterious girl screamed bad news from a mile away. Meanwhile, a massive, infuriating realization finally clicked in Lavis. His uncle Varkan and Bambi had been playing him like an absolute fool since day one. The second he clawed his way back to the demon realm, he swore he would make them pay in blood for this insult. Shion swallowed hard, nervously asking if Lavis seriously planned on skipping a hospital visit after that apocalyptic brawl. Lavis merely scoffed, brushing it off by saying hospitals were way too much of a tedious hassle. That absurdly casual response actually dragged a weak, exhausted chuckle out of Shion. Then his voice dropped to a quiet murmur. He confessed that mashing that SOS button was just a desperate, blind hope. He genuinely never expected Lavis to actually show up for him. Lavis frowned, tilting his head in pure confusion as he asked what the hell that was supposed to mean. Before Shion could even form a sentence, Street slapped a hand over her mouth. She smirked, ruthlessly mocking her master, by quoting the exact threat he barked during Jinji's brutal interrogation. This road better lead directly to their base. If you're lying, you're going to end up just like the corpses behind us. Street playfully pointed out that going on a murderous rampage hardly looked like an accident. Far away, Jinji was haunted by those very same terrifying words. She had figured Lavis slaughtered his way through her crew out of fierce loyalty to his best friend. But remembering his genuine confusion, upon learning Shion was actually abducted, a bizarre thought struck her. If they weren't even close, what drove him to unleash such absolute hell just to pull the kid out alive? Back on the street, Lavis caught a glimpse of Shion's cracked phone screen, the SOS beacon still stubbornly flashing. Street leaned in close, whispering that he really needed to drop the tough guy act, whether he wanted to admit it or not. Shion now looked at him like a literal superhero who swooped in to save his life. Breaking the silence, Shion blinked, suddenly registering the elephant in the room. He pointed a shaky finger at Street, awkwardly asking who on earth this girl was. Lavis didn't miss a beat, flatly introducing her as his loyal subordinate, Street. That single word, subordinate, sent Shion into a full-blown internal meltdown. Horrifying puzzle pieces violently slammed together in his brain. Miho's sudden, terrifying, superhuman strength. This shady girl tailing them like a shadow. The bone-crushing brawls with underground syndicates. And his bizarre, icy demeanor. Shion's eyes bugged out in sheer terror, utterly convinced that Miho had gotten sucked into some ultra-violent hardcore mafia. Meanwhile, Lavis calmly reasoned that hordes of assassins were bound to target his servant eventually anyway. Keeping up this ridiculous charade was pointless, so he decided it was finally time to drop the ultimate truth bomb. Radiating absolute arrogance, Lavis puffed out his chest and proudly proclaimed himself as Lavis Vindica, the blood heir to the almighty Demon King, a supreme being directly descended from the infernal depths of the demon. Shion just stared at him. Then his face scrunching up in pure, unadulterated confusion, he muttered. Lavis scowled, visibly annoyed, before firmly stating that since the mortal now understood his terrifying lineage, he was, obviously, expected to serve as his right-hand man in all future conquests. Shion stood there frozen, processing the sheer absurdity of it all for several agonizing seconds before letting out a shrill, panicked shriek as a soft, furry weight suddenly dropped right onto his lap. Street had morphed right back into her tiny feline form, purring and rubbing affectionately against him, totally drained of all her energy. Lavis waved off the glowing spirit, tossing the burden of explaining squarely onto her shoulders. Honestly, the guy was running on fumes after a brutal all-day. The spirit chirped in agreement, floating closer as she warned Sean to pin his ears back and pay close. Sean just stared at the talking feline, his face locked in a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. A second later, his eyes rolled right back into his skull, and he dropped to the floor, out cold. Following a suffocating silence, the report finally, and we're currently en route to the precinct. The second those words hit his ears, young Mu let his head drop. His jaw clenching so hard, his teeth visibly ground together. And just a few feet away, Detective Cha snapped to attention, catching a flicker of movement in the shadows. He instantly barked into the dark, demanding the intruder step out. Civilians were strictly barred from the perimeter, But before the cop could even draw his weapon, a towering figure draped in a pitch-black cloak smoothly commanded him to shut his mouth. With a single lazy shove, the intruder sent the seasoned detective slamming hard into the concrete, while the shadowy giant simply breezed right past his sprawling body, without even breaking his stride. The cloaked man deliberately stalked toward Young Moo's parked vehicle. He stared down at the shivering, shattered mobster, letting out a soft, mocking chuckle at what a miserable wreck he had become. The instant Young Moo locked eyes with the towering figure, his face contorted into a mask of raw, unfiltered desperation. "Mr. Bavor." His voice quivered as the words tumbled out, but Bavor effortlessly sliced through his panic, commanding the sniveling man to trail behind him. They had an urgent, off-the-record chat to get to. Cut back to the warehouse wreckage, where Detective Park Yoon-han was busy scanning the still smoldering ruins of the facility. The dispatch reports kept echoing in her head. Every single Blue Bow distributor tied to this massive syndicate had been simultaneously. Her mind spun, trying to piece together what kind of monster could pull off a synchronized takedown of this magnitude. Even worse, that psychoactive candy, the garbage somehow greenlit by the health ministry, had already infected thousands of high schoolers coast to coast. She grumbled under her breath, swearing that every single player in this twisted game had lost their absolute minds. Suddenly, she spotted Detective Cha groaning a few yards away, clutching his throbbing skull as he fought to get back on his feet. Yoon-han sprinted to his side urgently, demanding to know if he was severely injured. Wincing through the dizzying pain, Cha just pointed a shaking finger at the cruiser, croaking out an order to check the back. Thoroughly baffled, Yoon-han peered through the shattered window. Her pupils shrank to pinpricks. The hooded phantom had vanished into thin air. Not a single footprint or fiber was left in his wake. Miles away, a pathetic Young Moo was currently kissing the dirt at Bavor's feet. Swallowing, he clawed at the ground, sobbing and pleading for just one more shot at redemption. The gangster swore up and down that if he just cranked up his Blue Bow dosage, he would rip Levis to shreds. Bavor just tilted his head, his voice deathly soft, as he asked if this fool grasped the sheer astronomical value of those incinerated demon flowers. He had dragged himself through hell and back to harvest those petals, spending literal years grooming his fanatical cult. This absolute disaster was exactly why relying on fragile, useless humans was a monumental mistake from day one. Young Moo kept right on groveling, shrieking his promises to slaughter Levis by any means necessary. But Bavor was done talking. In a flash, he slammed a fistful of those parasitic flowers directly into Young Moo's screaming face, crushing the petals right into his skin. A blood-curdling shriek instantly ripped through the alley. The gangster crumpled to the concrete, thrashing around while violently clawing at his burning eye. Bavor stared down with eyes like ice, reminding the writhing man about the sacred blood pact they made. If he seriously wanted to prove his worth one last, he was going to have to let that cursed blossom do the heavy lifting. Back in a dingy safe house, Gingy was tearing the room apart, her heart hammering against her ribs in a full-blown panic attack. She frantically mumbled to herself, obsessing over securing the digital wallet. If she could just grab the crypto funds and vanish into the night, there was a slim chance she might actually wake up from this living hell. Bam! A shadowy figure suddenly crashed through the doorway. The dude looked totally unhinged. His mind clearly. The second Gingy caught sight of the jagged letters physically carved into his forehead, every drop of blood drained from her face. The crazed junkie shrieked pure gibberish about his precious candy, violently demanding a fresh hit of Blue Bow. His eyeballs twitched wildly in opposite directions, as sickening black veins spiderwebbed across his rotting skin. In a heartbeat, the terrifying reality hit Gingy like a freight train. This lunatic had overdosed hard on the cursed drug. Panic set in. She snatched up a random wooden pipe, screaming, "Where the hell did you come from?" But before she could even brace herself, the junkie delivered a brutal gut punch. The sheer force launched her backward, slamming her hard against the floor. Gasping for air and clutching her abdomen, Gingy stared in pure horror. The maniac's spine contorted backward at a sickening angle, as he screeched like a wild animal, begging for another hit of Blue Bow. Suddenly, thick black aura erupted straight from his pores. When he spoke again, the voice was completely alien, deep, sinister. "Oh man," the entity chuckled dryly. "Lavis is definitely going to flip." When shivering uncontrollably, Gingy pleaded with the dark presence to spare her life. But the voice just let out an exhausted sigh. "Sorry, kid, but my hands are tied," he murmured. "I don't have the juice to save you right now. If hell is knocking at your door, just embrace the flames already." Gingy's eyes widened in sheer panic. He shrugged nonchalantly, adding that even if she croaked right here, hey, look on the bright side. At least her corpse gets to stay behind in the mortal realm. Meanwhile, deep within the fiery abyss of the demon realm, tensions were boiling over. Anis shot daggers at Varkin, her blood boiling after getting the latest update on Lavis. "Have you completely lost your damn mind?" she roared. "Sending him down to the human world wasn't enough for you? You actually shoved a demon bloodstone inside the kid." Varkin just offered a calm, infuriating smirk. Look, the boy was practically a full-grown man now. Did she honestly believe he'd ship the son of the almighty Demon King off into the wild with zero protection? He just tucked the artifact away nicely inside Lavis's mortal meat suit. Hearing this, Anis absolutely lost it. "Why don't you just broadcast it to the whole damn universe?" she shrieked. "Hey everyone, the Demon Prince is stranded on Earth, totally exposed." Varkin raised his hands defensively, gently suggesting that maybe, just maybe, it was time for her to cut the umbilical cord. But Anis wasn't having any of it. "This isn't about trust, you idiot," she snapped. "It's the very fabric of reality I'm terrified of." With how fragile the dimensional barrier was acting right now, one tiny fracture could literally trigger an apocalyptic collapse. Varkin just crossed his arms, oozing absolute confidence. He swore up and down that Lavis packed way more firepower than she gave it. But before he could finish his proud little monologue, wham! Ains decked him right in the skull. "Raw power isn't the issue here," she screeched. "Lavis is a complete moron. That's the real threat. Because of that damn bloodstone tether. If Lavis's soul..." Rubbing his throbbing head, Varkin howled, "Oh, what the hell? We're literally adults. Stop throwing punches." He immediately spun around and barked at Bombay, ordering the minion to scour every single arcane archive they own. "Find me a spell," Varkin roared. "I need a ritual that permanently erases psychotic older sisters from the space-time continuum." Anis instantly lunged, strangling him by the collar. Watching the chaos unfold, Bombay just stood there, deadpan, silently, wondering how in the world Lavis managed to survive his childhood, trapped in a house full of... Cutting back to the human world, Xion had finally woken up. He sat there in stunned silence alongside Lavis and the floating spirit, still processing the absolute madness. His brain practically frying, he swallowed hard. "So, you really are an actual demon, huh?" he muttered nervously. "I mean, demon is the label you humans..." Hovering right next to him, the little spirit bobbed up and down, enthusiastically agreeing. That sparked a whole new wave of dread for Xion. Voice shaking, was he doomed to burn in hell when he kicked the bucket? Lavis didn't even blink. "Buddy, take a look around. Hell is already a live broadcast right here on Earth. Besides," he smirked, "if you just tag along with me back to the underworld, not a single soul would dare lay a finger on you." "Why, because you're rolling with Lavis Vindica, the one and only heir to the supreme..." Xion's face drained of all color. Nope. No way. There was zero chance he was ever setting foot in a nightmare dimension full of bloodthirsty monsters. Annoyed by the rejection, Lavis scowled and muttered under his breath. He swore that the absolute second he got back home, he was going to personally gouge Bonbay's eyeballs out and drain them dry like a juice box. Desperate to derail this terrifying train of thought. "Wait, what about Miho?" he blurted out. "The original one. Where is she?" The spirit's tone dropped, turning solemn. Miho's hourglass was already empty. Under the ironclad laws of possession, an exiled demon could only hijack a body that the Reaper had already claimed. Xion's face instantly dropped, a heavy shadow washing over his features. Choking back tears, he whispered, "Please." Hearing the raw grief in the boy's voice, Lavis simply tilted his head, completely baffled. To the demon, this was no tragedy. Miho would still survive for dozens of years down in the underworld anyway. After all, he shrugged. Every single soul ended up there eventually. The horrifying weight of those words slammed into Xion. Wait, did every human automatically plunge straight into hell after taking their final breath? Lavis scoffed, brushing off mortal superstitions as pure overreaction. In his eyes, the demon realm was basically a massive amusement park. Citri's eyes lit up with twisted glee as she chimed in cheerfully, painting a picture of echoing shrieks, shredded flesh, churning rivers of blood, and the glorious, never-ending agony that decorated their beloved homeland. Xion wildly threw his hands up, begging her to shut her mouth before he waving a dismissive hand, Lavis smoothly pointed out that the Reaper wouldn't be visiting anytime soon, so panicking now was just a waste of energy. He sharply commanded the boy to keep his cool act completely normal and keep his mouth shut about underworld business. Cheyenne gulped, nodding frantically. Out of nowhere, a vicious groan ripped from Lavis's throat. He clutched his skull as a crushing agony paralyzed his entire body. The brutal backlash of pushing the demonic bloodstone past its limits. By the time he finally dragged himself back to the house and pushed the front door open, Mina practically tackled him with a burst of excitement. In her hands rested a glowing, candle-lit cake. "Happy birthday!" she cheered, leaving the ancient demon completely paralyzed with pure confusion. A birthday. Mina's smile stretched from ear to ear as she bragged about how she and Mom had spent the entire day slaving away in the kitchen, setting up this massive surprise since yesterday morning. She shyly scratched her cheek, confessing the frosting might, but that didn't stop her from proudly slapping a cardboard party hat right onto the mighty demon's head. Bouncing on her heels, she announced their parents were on their way, right now. Before Lavis could even process the ridiculous situation, Mina whipped out her phone, insisting they needed a celebratory selfie right this second. The camera flash illuminated her face, making Lavis lock eyes on a stark white bandage taped over her cheek. He narrowed his eyes, demanding to know who touched her. Mina just brushed it off with a gentle smile, explaining a pack of street thugs had been bullying a frail old lady pushing a scrap cart. So she threw herself into the middle of the brawl to stop. She shrugged it off like it was nothing more than a paper cut. Lavis just stood there staring holes into her soul. This incredibly fragile, hopelessly weak human knowingly threw herself into danger, happily taking a beating. To a creature born in the abyss, this kind of selfless sacrifice was absolutely mind-boggling. Still beaming with that infectious, sunny warmth, Mina shoved a massive spoonful of frosting toward his mouth, insisting he had to be starving. The second the sugary treat hit his tongue, the demon's eyes blasted wide open in utter disbelief. An explosion of sweetness hijacked his senses. He gripped his own cheeks, melting into the incredibly bizarre, wonderful flavor, experiencing a rare, fleeting spark. But then, a blood-curdling roar shattered the peaceful moment. Jean Taisik kicked the front door open, storming into the living room like a rabid animal, screaming at the top of his lungs for the exact home addresses of every who dared to pelt him with eggs during his latest campaign speech. Spit flew from his mouth as he swore he would slaughter them all with his bare hands. His trembling assistant frantically nodded along, but Taisik viciously hooked him across the jaw anyway, roaring, "That worthless garbage, like him, deserved to be buried first." Shojuhi lunged forward in absolute panic, desperately clutching her husband's sleeve while begging him to take a breath. Without missing a beat, Taisik violently backhanded her across the face, snarling at her to keep her filthy hands off him. Mina shrieked, jumping between them and screaming that her mother did absolutely nothing wrong. Panting heavily, Taisik's crazed eyes finally locked onto the glowing dessert sitting on the table. A deeply sinister, pitch-black shadow consumed it. He had just been publicly humiliated on the campaign trail, and these ungrateful parasites were sitting around having a cozy little party instead of catering to his anger. Boiling with absolute rage, he violently shoved his daughter out of the way, screaming that this entire family had completely forgotten their place. With one vicious swing, he smashed the birthday cake straight into the floorboards. Juhi collapsed into sobbing tears, pleading with him to stop, because today was supposed to be Miho's special day. But the monstrous father only cranked his volume higher, bellowing that a stupid birthday meant absolutely nothing when his political career was on the... Lavis stood dead still, absorbing the entire chaotic scene in complete silence. Slowly, deliberately, his icy gaze dropped to the squashed, ruined cake smeared across the tiles. That sweet slice of heaven was rightfully his, and this pathetic mortal dared to crush it. A few steps away, Soju-hee wept bitterly, showering her kids with desperate apologies. Mina wrapped her arms fiercely around her mother, swearing that she had nothing to apologize for. Off to the side, Levi's locked his icy gaze onto Jong Tae-sik's retreating figure. For the very first time since stepping foot in this mortal realm, he truly believed he had found a creature far more conceited than himself. Later that evening, Jong Tae-sik paced around his luxurious office, throwing an absolute tantrum over young Moo. The spineless fool had cut off the cash flow and vanished entirely off. Tae-sik pounded his fist onto his mahogany desk, roaring that simply booking a photo op with Deputy Park cost a fortune up front these days. He relentlessly spat curses at young Moo, branding him a trembling assistant stammered out a promise, swearing they were turning over every stone to track the guy down. But that only fueled Tae-sik's raging inferno. He barked about how much it sickened, dirtying his hands with scum like young Moo just to bump up his pole, and somehow those imbeciles still managed to screw it all up. Out of nowhere, a second aide smashed through the office doors, gasping for air. "Sir, a video of Mina is absolutely blowing up the internet." Tae-sik snapped his head up in barking demands to know what the hell they were rambling about. The panicked aide shoved a tablet into his hands. The screen displayed Mina shielding a frail senior citizen, fiercely standing her ground against a pack of aggressive thugs. One of the punks violently snatched Mina's face, screaming at her to back off and mind her own damn business. Without missing a beat, Mina swatted his filthy hand away and fired right back. "Who the hell do you think you are?" Mocking a helpless grandmother and acting tough. The street rats branded her a lunatic, screeching at the crowd to just scatter and leave them alone. But refusing to retreat an inch, Mina softly knelt beside the terrified woman. Warmly staring at the footage, Tae-sik blinked in utter shock. His aide hurriedly pitched that if the voters realized this viral hero was his kid, his approval numbers would skyrocket overnight. The entire internet was practically worshipping the ground she walked on. The comment sections hailed Mina as a fearless, golden-hearted savior. A sinister smirk slowly crept across Tae-sik's face. Looks like this raging mess was actually spinning perfectly in his favor. At that exact moment, deep inside an opulent lounge, a gathering of shadowy women analyzed the exact same clip. A wicked smile tugged at one woman's lips as she purred about how brilliantly such a gorgeous face had been kept out of sight. Another figure, named Han-soo, demanded they drag the girl to them immediately, practically drooling over how fascinating. Then a chilling voice declared that Mina would serve as their mother's brand new vessel. Han-soo silently memorized Mina's glowing features on the monitor, while Yeonju sighed over how swiftly mortal bodies decayed. In the end, they just withered into frail, wrinkled husks. But this girl possessed the flawless, unblemished shell they had desperately hunted for. Yeonju proudly claimed it was sheer destiny. Han-soo kept her eyes glued to the paused frame, softly musing about what kind of tragic melody such an exquisite doll would sing when shattered. Within hours, every major broadcast network was practically screaming about the fearless high schooler who shielded a senior from street trash. The second, journalists uncovered that this brave teen was mayoral hopeful Jong Tae-sik's flesh and blood. The media frenzy went nuclear. Tae-sik's right-hand man practically vibrated with joy, reporting that fresh polls had catapulted him right back to the absolute top spot. With momentum like this, securing the office was an absolute lock. Even sweeter, primetime television planned to blast Mina's heroic standoff across the entire nation at 9. Tae-sik threw his head back and cackled. Who could have ever predicted that his kid's impulsive stunt would bless him with such a golden ticket? He instantly started plotting to squeeze every last drop of clout from this miracle. He barked at his team to set up charity galas, relief drives, and endless PR stunts carrying Mina's name to milk the spotlight and polish his own crown. Just then, an aide dropped a massive bombshell. The commanding director of the mega conglomerate Knox Corporation, Han Yeonju, in the flesh, had personally reached out after catching the viral clip. Tae-sik froze dead in his tracks. Knox. Quite literally one of the most terrifyingly powerful empires in the nation. Right then and there, Tae-sik finally realized his troublesome daughter might just be his ultimate winning lottery ticket. At the same time, Shihoon lowered his voice, confessing to Lavis that he had been completely in the dark about Minho's stepdad running for mayor until just days ago. Lavis pressed him, questioning if Sihoon actually grasped the reality of Minho's tangled family dynamic. Shaking his head, Sihoon revealed that Minho kept his home life locked away tight, though his intense bond with Mina was impossible to hide. To Minho, his little sister meant the absolute world. Hearing that, Lavis slowly lifted his gaze. Treasured. The word echoed in his mind, sparking a distant memory of Varkin's old warning. His loudmouth uncle always preached that true power required fiercely guarding whatever fueled your strength. A faint sigh escaped Lavis as he recalled just how infuriatingly obnoxious Varkin used to be. Suddenly, a strange shifting caught his eye. There was Citri, desperately wedged halfway through a narrow fissure in the wall. Lavis instantly demanded to know how on earth she got stuck. Yet again. Flushing bright red, the demon sheepishly muttered that she might have binged a little too hard on snacks lately. Massaging his temples, Lavis wondered if every single gateway bridging the human and demonic realms had to be this absurdly tight. Shifting gears, he demanded if Bambi had passed along any worthwhile intel. Wiggling free, Citri shoved a crumpled scrap of paper into his palm, panting that the tricky guy had already vanished into thin air. Lavis smoothed out the note, his brow instantly furrowing. The scribbled message obnoxiously cheered him on for a job well done so far, before cheekily suggesting that if he kept up the pace, he just might reel in Bavor Hilt next. Snap. In a heartbeat, Lavis shredded the paper to confetti, roaring that slippery bastard was treating him like a pawn again. Clenching his fists, he swore he would slaughter Bambi, way before he ever bothered hunting down Bavor. As Citri frantically waved her hands, begging him to chill out, Si-hoon silently scrolled through the latest polling data on his screen. The glaring graphics proved it. Jung Tae-sik was completely dominating the mayoral race. Si-hoon murmured, sounding defeated, that the public had swallowed Tae-sik's narrative hook, line, and sinker. If this momentum held, that man was walking straight into the mayor's office. Lavis shifted his focus to the sprawling concrete jungle. Could a creature as greedy as Jung Tae-sik actually devour an entire metropolis? Scratching his neck, Si-hoon clarified that Tae-sik would not physically eat the buildings, but he absolutely planned to rule every inch of it with an iron fist. That chilling description immediately triggered a dark connection in Lavis's mind. He muttered that Tae-sik's insatiable hunger mirrored a Sirenus demon perfectly. Tilting his head, Si-hoon asked what the hell a Sirenus was. Jumping right in, Citri babbled that they were legendary gluttons from the underworld, grotesque beasts, cursed to gorge on everything in their path without even the most vicious demons despised them, because their bottomless pits of stomachs literally never shut down. Fidgeting slightly, she pointed out the disturbing fact that one of those exact monsters was currently reigning over this very territory back in the Dark Realm. Yet, despite the eerie similarities, she insisted that Jung Tae-sik was nothing more than flesh and blood. Still, Lavis narrowed his piercing eyes, not buying the coincidence. If a parasite like that could claw his way to the top of this city, then the human world was already rotting from the inside out. Shooting a deadpan glare at Citri, he coldly ordered her to lay off the snacks before she mutated into a bloated Sirenus too. Tears instantly welled up in her eyes as she whimpered a promise to diet. Meanwhile, a heavy sigh escaped Si-hoon's lips. He confessed how deeply it sickened him to see Tae-sik weaponizing Mina for his own political chessboard. At the mention of her name, Lavis's thoughts drifted to the tragic siblings. Hours later, as he stepped through the front door of his house, a tense conversation drifted from the living room. Pacing anxiously, Seo Joo-hee stammered, demanding to know what fate awaited Mina. Cool as ice, Han Yeonju sat opposite her, purring about Mina's drop-dead gorgeous looks and raw, undeniable talent. She confidently stated that once she nailed down some basic choreography, the girl could hit the stage in record time, rocketing straight to the center spot of a massive idol group. Joo-hee flinched, her voice trembling as she reminded the room that Mina was literally still just a kid in high school. More importantly, the poor girl had never breathed a single word about craving the spotlight. Jung Tae-sik snapped a painfully fake smile plastered on his face. He hissed at his wife to stop humiliating them in front of the big-shot director. He aggressively argued that burying potential like Mina's was nothing short of a criminal waste. Pivoting back to Yeonju, he smoothly apologized, brushing off his wife's frantic worries as just silly nerves. Right as the tension peaked, Lavis strolled straight into the lion's den. Joo-hee's panicked eyes darted toward him instantly, but Yeonju just flashed a brilliant smile, smoothly waving away the mother's fears. Without missing a beat, she promised that Nox Agency would bankroll Mina's entire education, right alongside her glamorous new career. Today's idols operate on a whole different level from the older generation. They can secure massive stardom while still crushing it at elite universities. Lavis coldly scanned the room, his piercing gaze ultimately locking on to Hansu, who hadn't taken his eyes off Mina for a single second. Unsettled by that intense stare, Lavis mentally questioned the guy's true motives. Right across from them, Tae-sik eagerly flipped open a sleek folder. He practically drooled, asking if Mina's signature was the final puzzle piece. A composed, calculating smile spread across Han Yeongju's face. She smoothly declared that the paperwork resting on the table would absolutely skyrocket Mina's future. This was a bona fide exclusive contract with the prestigious Nox Agency. The second those heavy words dropped, Mina's entire body went. She just kept her chin tucked tightly to her chest. That's when Han Yeongju finally spotted Lavis hovering in the back. Pitching her voice with polished politeness, she asked if he was Mina's older brother, before seamlessly launching into a formal introduction. "I am Han Yeongju," she announced confidently, "the representative director of Nox Agency." Lavis just fixed her with a deadpan, icy stare, completely ignoring the introduction. Instantly irritated, Tae-sik barked at him fiercely, ordering Jong Minho to show some damn respect and greet their guest properly. But Han Yeongju merely let out a soft, dismissive chuckle, waving it off by saying, "Teenagers these days all carry that kind of rebellious attitude." Lavis held his tongue. Deep inside his mind, Xian's earlier words echoed the absolute truth that Minho cherished his little sister more than anything. Suddenly, a much older memory bled into his thoughts. Way back in the desolate demon realm, Varkan had drilled a crucial lesson into his head. His uncle had warned him that the universe crawled with relentless enemies, all desperately hungering to snatch the ruler's absolute power. As the sole blood heir to the legendary demon king Gamadera Vindica Lavis, shouldered an incredibly massive burden. Because of that brutal reality, he desperately needed to master the art of rallying fiercely loyal allies to his. Back then, an arrogant Lavis had scoffed, stubbornly whining that he could crush any obstacle, completely solo. Varkan just roared with booming laughter, boldly predicting that one day, Lavis would instinctively gravitate toward people he genuinely cared about. And once that fateful connection sparked, it would fundamentally reshape his entire soul without him even noticing the shift. Young Lavis had immediately brushed off the lecture, demanding they jump straight back into physical combat training because he utterly despised sappy, emotional talk. Varkan only laughed even harder, his chest swelling with pride as he declared that Lavis was truly cut from his exact same cloth. Snapping back to the tense reality, Lavis firmly planted a reassuring hand right on me. The entire room fell into a dead, suffocating silence. Locking on to her gaze, he asked point blank if this was a path she genuinely wanted for herself. Startled, Mina slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide with total shock. He calmly assured her that if she was just suffocating her own desires to please someone else, she needed to speak up immediately. If anyone was forcing her hand, he would personally handle the fallout. Those deeply protective words made Mina's pupils tremble violently with unshed emotion. Then dark, suffocating flashbacks from her childhood violently tore through her mind. She vividly pictured Jong Tasik viciously yanking Seo Ju-hee by her fragile hair. He shrieked like a maniac that she would never rip the kids away from his grip, maliciously boasting that they were permanently locked under his official family register. He spat that even if she managed to run, she'd starve in the streets without his money. Desperate, Saw Chan had pleaded with him to just let them walk away in peace. Tasik merely responded with cruel, sadistic mockery. Then Mina remembered her tiny younger self, bravely marching forward, screaming at the top of her lungs that they still had their late grandfather's massive inheritance to fall back on. Tasik savagely snapped at her, growling that she spouted the exact same pathetic garbage as her delusional mother right before he brutally squeezed Seo Ju-hee's cheeks. He sneered, violently drilling his ultimate twisted survival rule into Mina's young brain. Never, ever let go of what is rightfully yours. Jerked back to the current moment, Mina finally gave a resolute nod. Yes, she fiercely wanted to walk this path, but she laid down one absolute, non-negotiable condition. If she pulled in any cash from this massive deal, every single dime had to flow directly into her own personal pockets. Deep within her racing heart, Mina swore an unbreakable. One day she would completely shatter her mother and brother's invisible chains and drag them away from that absolute monster, Jong Tasik, no matter the cost. Tasik blinked in momentary shock, but quickly covered it up with a loud, obnoxious laugh, faking that her demand was completely obvious from the start. Han Yongju maintained her sleek, professional smile, smoothly suggesting they lock in the paperwork immediately. Tasik shamelessly bowed enthusiastically, showering the director with greasy He dramatically declared that Mina was way more precious to him than his very own life. Shaking with anxiety, Seo Ju-hee turned to ask Mina for reassurance one last. Hiding any lingering doubts, Mina flashed a warm, reassuring smile at her mom. She gently pleaded with her to just have faith. Turning to Lavis, she whispered a soft thank you for his concern. He just stared back, his expression totally unreadable, letting the silence hang. Fast forward to later that evening. Yeonju and Hansu lounged in the back of a sleek luxury sedan, deep in conversation about their newest obsession, Mina. A wicked smirk crept across Yeonju's face as she purred that the longer she watched the girl, the more flawless she seemed. That breathtaking beauty, the pure innocence, those striking eyes. Every single detail was the absolute masterpiece she had been hunting for. Hansu paused for a beat before pivoting the conversation. He brought up Mina's brother, pointing out a deeply unsettling vibe surrounding the guy. Yeonju raised a curious eyebrow, demanding context. Hansu frowned, explaining that Minho radiated a bizarre, suffocating, an aura that didn't feel remotely human. That wild claim just made Yeonju let out a dark, amused chuckle. She teasingly asked if her boys seriously thought Minho was some shadowy lackey straight out of the demon realm. Dead serious, Hansu begged to slaughter the kid right now if he was a threat. But Yeonju coolly shot the idea down. In her mind, making a rash, bloody move right now, the absolute only prize that mattered right now was Mina. They just had to lay low and keep watching from the shadows. But out of nowhere, Hansu viciously clawed at his own skull. He howled in agony, screaming that merely looking at Minho fueled a psychotic urge to rip the boy to shreds. Yeonju softly stroked his hair, soothing him. She promised that patience was key, and the pitch-black, moonless night was right around the corner. The second that dark ritual wrapped up, and Mina's body belonged entirely to her, then Hansu would get a free pass to torture Jong Minho however he pleased. That sinister promise instantly lit up Hansu's twisted face with. He eagerly gasped, begging her to swear on it. Flashing a sickeningly warm smile, she whispered that it would be a special gift from Mommy. But then Hansu let a forbidden name slip past his lips. Mara. The sheer second that word hit the air, Yeonju's warm mask shattered into icy rage. She fiercely snapped at him to never utter that cursed name again. Mara was dead and gone. In this life, she was strictly Han Yeonju, and very soon she would shed this skin and be resurrected as Jong Mina. Her cold eyes clouded over with pure, unhinged obsession. She vehemently swore that neither the almighty Demon King nor the 12 Black Thrones could block her path this time. Come hell or high water, she refused to taste defeat ever again. A little while later, Mina found herself standing outside the massive Nox Agency headquarters, inhaling a shaky breath. Muttering a quick pep talk under her breath, she swallowed her fear and marched through the glass doors. Inside, Yeonju loudly clapped her hands, demanding the room's full attention. She projected her voice, declaring that starting this exact moment, Jong Mina was officially joining their tight-knit family. She shot the room a knowing look, reminding the trainees that Mina's face was already blowing up all over social media. With a triumphant grin, she announced Mina as the brand new center for Nox's upcoming girl group, Zara. Standing in the back, a veteran trainee named Hee-chan scowled fiercely. She aggressively spoke up, demanding to know how such a massive casting choice could drop out of thin. She had bled and sweated in the practice room for literal years to secure that center spot. Yeonju maintained her chillingly calm posture, acknowledging Hee-chan's brutal grind, but firmly stating the decision was final. To twist the knife, she ordered the bitter girl to personally show Mina the rope. The exact millisecond they were left alone, Hee-chan's bottled-up rage completely detonated. Spitting venom, she cornered Mina, asking if this golden ticket was handed out purely through dirty politics. She aggressively poked at the fact that Mina was the pampered daughter of a heavy-hitting mayoral candidate. Pointing a shaking finger, she accused the rookie of snatching away a dream. Panicking, Mina frantically tried to clear the air, but Hee-chan was completely deaf to her excuses. Blinded by fury, the veteran trainee whipped her hand out, viciously slapping Mina right across the jaw. Mina instantly clutched her stinging face. A thin bead of crimson slowly Hee-chan screamed that the entire world would soon see exactly how far Daddy's money and strings could pull a talentless hack. Meanwhile, just a few floors away, Yeonju swung her private office door wide open. Inside, Hansu was glued to a glowing. He practically vibrated with twisted excitement, jabbing a finger at the monitor, and Yeonju's eyes locked onto the live footage, and a terrifying, cold-blooded rage into this dark entity. Hee-chan wasn't even human. She was lower than a piece of trash. That brainless, pathetic little girl had just dared to leave a scratch on her absolute. The raw fury boiling beneath her icy stare was so suffocating, it sent literal shivers down Han-chan's spine. Just a few blocks away, Lavis kicked back on a park bench, flanked by Xian and Street. Xian chimed in, dropping the fact that Nox Agency was practically the biggest talent powerhouse in the entire nation. Street smirked, bragging that 2 solid centuries of shadowing human society made her an absolute expert on their world. Lavis crossed his arms defensively, muttering that if chasing the idol spotlight was Minya's true dream, he couldn't care less. But Han Yeonju and her sketchy inner circle were seriously starting to get under his skin. They didn't reek of raw, demonic energy, yet their entire. Street quickly dropped a warning. Ancient demons lurking in the mortal realm for centuries knew exactly how to mask their dark auras without a trace. Lavis gave a grim nod. They were undeniably shady. The group chat quickly pivoted to a much heavier topic, getting Lavis his original strength back. Beaming with pride, Street dropped a massive bombshell. She had finally cracked the code to reactivate the demonic bloodstone's true potential. That instantly hooked Lavis's undivided attention. Running on a fraction of his power meant even bottom-tier humans kept stepping on his toes. He snapped an order, commanding Street and his quote-unquote servant number one, Shion, to dig up every dirty secret on Han Yongju and her kid. Street pumped her fist, totally hyped to take on the gig. Shion threw a fit over the whole servant label, but got completely ignored. Lavis just shot him a deadpan look, making it crystal clear that fighting back was completely pointless. Utterly defeated, Shion let out a heavy, dramatic... Fast forward to that night. Heian dragged her feet alone down the dimly lit sidewalks. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, her brain completely short. 4 grueling years of blood, sweat, and tears vaporized in a single... Out of nowhere, the sharp, deadly whistle of a blade slicing the wind hissed right behind her neck. She froze dead in her track. Pivoting at a snail's pace, she locked eyes with Han Young stalking toward her. Pure, icy terror instantly flooded her veins. Heian stammered out a frantic apology, swearing up and down that she only snapped because she was completely blinded by rage. She begged, crying, that she never actually wanted to put Minya in the hospital. But before the excuse could even leave her lips, Han Young lunged. Crimson painted the damp pavement. Staring down with dead, soulless eyes, he coldly whispered a single question. Why did she dare to strike Minya's face? His mother absolutely despised it when her precious vessel got scratched up. Flashback to years ago. Han Yongju was living a perfectly normal suburban life, complete with a genuinely sweet, doting husband. But lurking just below the iron grate of a nearby storm drain, an absolute nightmare was stalking them. Mara glared at their sickeningly sweet family dynamic with absolute zero warmth. Later, that exact night, Han Yongju jolted awake, only to find Mara hovering over her mattress. Before a scream could even escape, the demon completely hijacked her physical form. Trapped inside her own head, the panicked mother clawed back with everything she had to protect her babies. But Mara completely crushed her soul into submission. As her groggy husband finally stirred awake, Mara just glared down at him like he was a literal piece of garbage. Without a second thought, she snatched him by the windpipe and casually pitched him straight through the glass window. His blood-curdling shriek ripped through the dark sky. Wearing Han Yongju's skin like a cheap costume, Mara's toxic rage only mutated into something far. To her, the entire human race was nothing more than a giant bin of cheap disposal. Even her host's own flesh and blood meant absolute zero. While delivering the twins, she practically spit pure venom. Screaming that her ancient rivals were causing the contractions, she violently lashed out, kicking the medical staff, and trashing every single person in that delivery room. Once the babies were out, she treated the newborns. Anytime little Hei Chan-ju wobbled over for some affection, she brutally swatted him away without batting a single eye. In her twisted mind, those kids were nothing more than convenient meat shields, destined to take a hit for her later. While playing the role of mom, she aggressively hunted the streets for the ultimate, because at the end of the day, Mara never lost sight of her true, terrifying endgame. Someday she was going to score a physical shell strong enough to permanently cage the absolute monster that was her darks. She planned to hoard eternal youth, jaw-dropping beauty, and god-tier power, building up to a massive apocalyptic revenge tour against every single idiot. Snapping back to the present, right after Hei-chan's violent rampage, Detectives Cha and Park Si-hun flashed their badges at Nox Agency HQ, ready to tear the crime scene apart. Mara played the part perfectly, faking absolute heartbreak over the tragedy, while masquerading as a devoted director who treated every single rookie like her own flesh and blood. Detective Cha grilled her with laser focus, while Detective Park Si-hun hung back, quietly dissecting the entire room. But the vibe in that space? Completely off. Hansu hovered right next to his mom, tracking everyone's movements with a chilling, unblinking stare. They didn't have a shred of hard evidence, but Si-hun's gut screamed that something incredibly sinister was lurking behind the Nox Agency's flawless PR. The second the cops walked out the door, a vile, sludgy cocktail of black bile and squirming bugs violently spewed from Han Yongju's mouth. The creepy crawlers skittered across the floor tiles before melting into the pitch-black shadows. Mara aggressively clicked her tongue, thoroughly pissed off and bitching about the nosy cops. She angrily wondered why the hell they were snooping into her business, and just how much cash someone must have slipped them to sniff around this aggressively. She viciously cursed the system for letting pesky little rats like them roam the streets. Hansu smoothly wrapped his arms around her, whispering for her to chill out, because those clueless detectives would drop the case soon enough. Scowling, Mara dragged a hand across her face. Her blood boiled just thinking about Haechan scuffing up her future vessel. But Hansu swore up and down that he'd have everything prepped flawlessly. Fast forward to the next morning, and the trainees were all packed into the studio. Gossip about Haechan's brutal ambush had already infected the entire building. Everyone was whispering behind their hands, throwing around rumors that Haechan had totally snapped. Hansu commanded the room, dropping a massive bombshell. Starting tomorrow, the entire Zara crew was being shipped off to a shared dorm. He spun a nice little lie claiming they needed to detox the toxic vibe after such a messy scandal. He swore that bunking together would build killer teamwork and keep them safe, but Jung Min-ha looked completely blindsided. She immediately challenged him, asking if packing up their lives and moving was actually mandatory. Hansu locked his dead eyes onto hers, coldly questioning if she actually had a valid excuse to say no. Panic spiked in Minha's chest as she pictured her helpless mom and little brother. If she bailed, they'd be trapped alone with that monster Jung Tae-sik. He flashed a plastic smile, telling her to relax and just fall in line with corporate orders. But behind that fake grin, his thoughts were pure poison. If anyone dared put a single scratch on Mara's shiny new vessel, he would literally butcher them. Swallowing her dread, Minha caved and promised to pack her bags. Cut to Xi'an's place, where agonizing screams were practically rattling the windows. Xi'an was fighting for his life against a pair of dumbbells dripping with sweat and completely gassed out. Lavis Vindica glared at him. In Lavis's expert opinion, calling this weak flailing a workout was sure the dark demonic aura brewing inside Xi'an was spiking dramatically, but his actual physical muscles, utter garbage. He might be able to flex his dark aura to scare off regular street thugs, but against a hardcore demon beast, he'd get obliterated in seconds. Lavis mentally cursed Banbei to hell and back. If that guy wanted to play puppet master, he could have at least dropped a manual on how to properly harness the demon bloodstone. Then a painful realization hit him. Banbei actually did send a letter earlier. That piece of paper supposedly broke down the stone's mechanics, but Lavis, in a fit of pure, now an awful, sinking feeling washed over him. He heavily suspected the exact cheat code they desperately... Out of nowhere, Strix came sprinting toward them, screaming at the top of her lungs. She was moving so frantically that she practically face-planted right into the floor. Lavis instantly clocked that she was dashing on two legs again, and demanded to know what the hell was wrong. Catching her breath, Strix wildly dropped a massive truth bomb on them. Han Yongju wasn't some basic human boss at all. She was literally Marabellix, the legendary witch of greed, and one of the terrifying 12 Black Thrones. Xi'an was so completely stunned he nearly dropped the heavy iron straight onto... Strix rapidly explained that Mara had hijacked a mortal body and had been secretly pulling strings in the human realm for decades. A sudden flash of recognition hit Lavis. He finally figured out why the woman's aura felt so... A dark smirk crept across his face as he muttered that he had finally tracked down exactly where that obnoxious runaway witch had been. Hearing this, Stria started digging through her memories, dragging up ancient legends she'd heard regarding Mara and Enia. Centuries ago, countless fledgling demons practically worshipped the ground Ennius walked on. Completely mesmerized by the masses hung on to every single syllable the future queen dropped, treating her speeches as absolute gospel. Hell, even her sacred blessings were legendary across the entire demon underworld. Mara, on the flip side, absolutely loathed living in her shadow. Anytime a demon dared to shower Ennius with compliments, Mara would completely fly off the handle. Rumor had it, she once terrorized a little demon girl purely because the poor kid idolized Ennius over her. Ultimately, that toxic, rotting jealousy drove her completely off the deep end, pushing her to commit high treason against the underworld itself. The crazy witch hijacked a core supply of demonic souls and vanished into thin air before anyone could drag. From that day forward, she had been laying low, somewhere deep within the mortal realm. Shane casually pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, analyzing the situation. Why on earth did Mara zero in on Zhang Minya out of millions of people? She had somehow sensed that Lavis Venduka was pulling the strings inside Minya's body. But Lavis shut that theory down in a heartbeat. If that crazy witch actually recognized his true identity, there was absolutely zero chance she would have just ignored him for this long. Even so, he had to swallow his pride and admit the bitter truth. Stuck in this pathetic, powered-down vessel, taking Mara head-on was totally out of the question. Plus, her little demon spawn were likely packing some serious firepower too. Straya nodded in agreement, laying down the law they absolutely had to juice up the demonic bloodstone right this second. With a sharp grin, she officially kicked off phase 1 of their little witch hunt. Before they even thought about stepping up tomorrow, they needed to wipe out the surrounding trash and scrape together some solid intel. Meanwhile, across town, So Juhee and Jung Minya were strolling through a shopping plaza together. But Juhee's stomach was still tied in nervous knots over that idol contract. The second Minya set foot inside Nock's agency, it felt like an endless parade of absolute chaos had glued itself to her back. Lowering her voice, she gently nudged her daughter, whispering that if she wanted to back out and tear up the contract, now, flashing a warm, comforting smile, Minya squeezed her mom's hand. She promised that the cops were hot on the trail and would definitely lock up the psycho who attacked Hee-chan. Everything was going to be totally fine. But Juhee's eyes just clouded with heartbreak, softly reminding her sweet girl about her lifelong dream of becoming a vet. Minya's gaze drifted over to a rack loaded with cute pet toys, a wave of nostalgia washing over her. But chasing dreams required a luxury she simply did not possess. Time. Right now, the clock was ticking, and her only mission was to rescue her family from their living nightmare as fast as humanly possible. She was absolutely desperate to rip her mom and brother out of Jong Tae-sik's suffocating top. Stepping into the spotlight as an idol was her golden ticket, a one-way fast track to dragging in enough cash to rewrite. Looking straight into her mother's eyes, she firmly declared that dreams evolve, promising she was going to climb straight to the top and build a fortress around their family. Heavy, guilt-ridden tears started pooling in So Juhee's weary eyes. Her voice cracked as she confessed her deepest regret if she had just stayed single and never remarried. Maybe her kids wouldn't be drowning. Minya instantly snatched her mom's trembling hands, fiercely ordering her to stop shouldering the blame. After her dad passed away, trying to raise 2 kids completely solo was a soul-crushing uphill battle. There was absolutely no way anyone could have predicted the monstrous transformation Jong Tae-sik. Back then, he had worn the perfect mask of a deeply kind and reliable. They were all completely played. Juhee bit her lip to hold back the sobs, but Minya just flashed a ridiculously bright, fearless, begging her mom to just hold on a tiny bit longer. Very soon the storm was going to break, and life would actually fast forward to later that afternoon. Lavis, Straya, and Shane hit up a massive theme park, all supposedly part of Straya's grand, top-secret training regimen. Lavis stumbled away from a towering roller coaster looking absolutely soul-snatched and completely wrecked. Beside him, Shane was practically biting a hole through his tongue just to keep from wiping a tear from his eye. Shane sarcastically asked if mighty demons typically puked their guts. Lavis instantly snapped back, fiercely shouting that his current state of misery had absolutely nothing to do with his demonic. He frantically blamed it on food poisoning, swearing up and down that whatever. Shane dryly pointed out the absolute lack of dignity, noting that Lavis was literally wiping fresh puke off his chin while making up excuses. Humiliated, dramatically vowing that whichever psycho invented the roller coaster was getting a one-way ticket to eternal hellfire. Once the chaotic trio finally pulled up to a creepy abandoned building, completely choked by dead, twisted black. Lavis scanned their eerie surroundings, tossing a skeptical glance at the spirit to confirm if they had actually hit the right spot. The ethereal guide nodded with absolute certainty. She revealed that a rogue demon had recently slipped under the radar here in the mortal realm, but her razor-sharp senses had finally locked onto his scent. When Lavis demanded the target's name, the spirit introduced their prey as Scream. This wasn't just any monster. He was a twisted fiend who literally devoured human shrieks. Every gasp of sheer terror served as his personal buffet. Because of this sick appetite, the perfect bait would be someone who could dish out a truly spectacular wail of panic. A wicked smirk crept across Lavis's face as his eyes darted straight to Cheyenne. The poor boy instantly scrambled backward, frantically swearing he had never shrieked out of fear a day in his life. Completely ignoring the protests, Lavis grabbed him by the collar and hauled him right through the front doors. The spirit hung back outside, keeping watch, and tossing them a quick, "Good luck," as they vanished. Stepping into the shadowy abyss, the duo cautiously swept the interior. Cheyenne flinched at every shifting shadow, while Lavis just rolled his eyes. To him, these cheap, haunted house props looked absolutely pathetic. Cheyenne practically vibrated with anxiety, insisting the atmosphere felt deeply cursed, and admitting the spirit's grim tales had him entirely. Lavis sighed sharply, reminding the trembling boy that they were here to assassinate a rogue demon, not cower from plastic. But out of nowhere, a grotesque prop plummeted from the pitch-black ceiling, dangling mere inches from their faces. Caught completely off guard, Lavis, the supposedly fearless hunter, let out an ear-piercing shriek. Shion blinked in sheer disbelief. He quickly grabbed his companion's sleeve, practically asking, "Wait, did that actually just scare you?" Lavis instantly snapped back into denial mode, stubbornly claiming he was merely running a vocal test to bait the enemy out. Pushing his glasses up his nose, Shion ruthlessly pointed out that it was definitely the most genuine yelp Lavis had ever squeezed out. Clearly irritated by the teasing, Lavis abruptly changed the subject, finally dropping the real reason they were risking their necks. He revealed that whenever pure wickedness spiked on Earth, his demon bloodstone practically leaked raw energy. Mortal sins were basically a slow drip, but a demon's malice. That was a highly concentrated power boost. Soaking up that dark aura was the ultimate fast track to regaining his lost strength. Suddenly, a spine-chilling voice vibrated through the decaying walls. The unseen entity purred, praising Lavis's shriek as a sweet, uncorrupted melody, comparing it to the intoxicating scent of fresh blood or a newborn's wail. Shion's blood ran cold. Slithering out from the inky blackness, the horrific monstrosity known as Scream. His hollow, predatory gaze instantly locked onto the petrified boy with absolute. The monster practically drooled, declaring Shion's terrified aura an absolute delicacy and craving a deeper taste. But before those filthy claws could hook their prey, Lavis lunged in intercept, glaring daggers at the beast. He hissed that Shion was exclusively his property. Scream threw back his head and cackled, mocking the idea that some frail mortal could ever With a lazy, contemptuous flick of his wrist, the demon swatted Lavis aside like a gnat and snatched Shion. Shion wailed in sheer agony as Scream eagerly inhaled the agonizing sound. You could literally see the villain's muscles bulge as the fear sprawled on the floor. Lavis clicked his tongue in pure frustration. This pathetic human vessel was dragging him down. Even getting back on his feet felt like lifting boulders. Still, he forced himself up and charged back into the fray. Meanwhile, Scream wrapped Shion in a suffocating wave of dark aura, gleefully demanding the boy scream his lungs out. Lavis barked at Shion to shut his mouth, frantically warning him that every single cry was acting like steroids for the monster. Panicking, the terrified teenager aggressively clamped both hands over his own mouth, choking. Scream simply taunted his prey, sadistically, promising to rip out those wide, fearful eyes and string them up as shiny. Lavis bobbed and weaved through a barrage of deadly strikes, desperately hunting for a blind spot. But despite his hardcore combat instincts, his sluggish mortal body just couldn't keep pace. Scream eventually overpowered him, slamming the weakened hunter brutally against the floor. Condensing 1,000 agonizing shrieks into a razor-sharp phantom blade, the monstrous fiend bragged he was about to. The beast drove his jagged claw straight toward the hunter's right eye. But the exact split second the talon made contact, it instantly exploded into a million jagged shards. Scream stumbled back, totally baffled. Lavis slowly tilted his head up, a terrifying, unnatural glow flaring up from deep within his pupil. In that defining moment, a crucial detail from Bambi's letter flashed through his mind. The Bloodstone wasn't just a battery. It had been tweaked to funnel his soul's pure might straight into this fragile, mortal shell. The catch: that god-tier power could only trigger once the stone's protective casing. Finally piecing the puzzle together, Lavis mentally cursed Bambi for leaving out such a wildly dangerous loophole. As Scream stared in total shock, Lavis flashed a chilling smirk, casually informing the beast that he was dealing with way more than just flesh and bone. He barked a sudden order at Shion: "Drop all restraints," and let out the most ear-piercing shriek imaginable. Utterly baffled, but placing his faith in his leader, Shion sucked in a massive breath and ripped out a deafening, throat-tearing howl. The monster known as Scream cackled with pure glee, greedily swallowing up every last decibel of that agonizing noise. But here was the brutal catch. While the fiend gorged on the sound the demon, as frantic shrieks kept bouncing off the walls, raw, intoxicating power surged straight into Lavis's veins. Scream gloated, loudly boasting that Lavis's massive ego would be his downfall, since this pathetic tactic was only feeding the monster's strength. Lavis just flashed a wicked, knowing grin. He pointed out one fatal flaw: the beast actually lost his speed every single time he stopped to feast on the noise. Before the creature could even blink, Lavis exploded forward. His agility had multiplied to a terrifying, almost inhuman crack. The outer shell of the demon bloodstone finally shattered into jagged pieces, sending pure, unadulterated demonic energy roaring through his Lavis slammed a devastating strike right into Scream's skull, unleashing a savage blast of mana that violently rocked the entire building. As the suffocating dust cleared, Lavis felt it. His original godlike might was finally starting to wake up. Puny human medicine and basic physical training couldn't hold a candle to this intoxicating rush of power. The fully awakened Bloodstone could now devour every single fiend he crushed from here on out, would act as living fuel, slowly restoring the overwhelming dominance. Trembling in the corner, Shin So-an stammered out a terrifying question, wondering if the beast had somehow... Lavis just gave a chilling smirk. "We're moving on," he announced. "Time to hunt the next target." Meanwhile, over at the Nox Agency dormitories, Manhwa finally arrived, bowing politely to thank Han Young for the secure escort. As she stepped into her sterile new quarters, Han Young laid down the absolute rules. She was strictly forbidden from stepping outside until the official training kicked off. Her heart hammered with anxiety, but Manhwa swore she would give this opportunity everything she had. The heavy door clicked shut. Standing utterly alone in the sun, she silently repeated her driving mantra. Every single sacrifice was for the sake of her mom and little brother. Failure wasn't an option. She had to climb the ranks and rake in enough cash to finally drag her family out of the gutter. Far from that lonely dorm room, reaching her pale hand out toward the glowing screen, she asked Hansu if Jong Min-ho would obediently submit once he became her flawless, living vessel. Hansu bowed deeply, assuring his dark mother that every single detail was falling perfectly into place. Purring with twisted satisfaction, Mara commanded him to kick off the gruesome preparations right away. Her horrifying endgame: to hijack Manhwa's flesh and achieve total, terrifying rebirth. Back outside the shattered building, Straya bowed respectfully, congratulating Lavis on reclaiming. Kneeling in absolute reverence, she swore to blindly follow the Lord of Blood to the absolute fringes of the abyss. Lavis rolled his eyes at the exhausting theatrics, bluntly telling her to drop the dramatic flair and make herself actually useful. His first ironclad command track down Mara Veliax, and to keep aggressively digging up every scrap of shadowy the very moment his power levels hit the sweet spot, he planned to rip Straya accepted the heavy order without a second of hesitation, vanishing into the shadows to begin the hunt. Miles away, a completely different fiend named Apep. He casually loitered right next to a guy puffing away on a cigarette. Whispering dark temptations, the demon maliciously egged the man on. Lavis pressed on with his relentless crusade, tracking down the vile demons lurking in the shadows of the human realm. Without warning, his hand shot out, snatching up. The demon squealed in pure, pathetic terror, completely clueless as to what had just hit him. Lavis just scoffed, visibly repulsed by the foul, garbage-like stench radiating off the creature. He casually noted that this pathetic bottom feeder survived purely by scraping up the dirty, toxic energy leaking from drunks and chain smokers. Standing on the sidelines, Xian watched in absolute shock as Lavis effortlessly ripped apart yet another. His mind could barely process the sheer madness of watching Xian confessed that it completely blew his mind just how many of these monsters were lurking right under humanity's nose. Lavis broke it down for him. Whenever a demon crossed over into the mortal realm, their magic slowly drained away, starving without the dark energy of their home turf. To keep from withering away into nothing, these exiled creatures had to scramble for any alternative fuel source they could sink their claws into. More often than not, they gorged themselves on the darkest parts of a chilling realization washed over Xian. All those creepy urban legends and ghostly folklore whispered around campfires weren't just made-up fairy tales after all. Lavis let a tiny pulse of mana slip from his fingertips, and the air around them instantly shifted, hitting Xian like a jolt. His dormant magic was finally sparking back to life, even if it was just a faint flicker compared to the raging inferno he used to wield. The crimson glow of the demon bloodstone pulsed warmly against his skin, finally waking up and doing exactly what it was meant to do. Xian practically chewed his lip off, worrying about Strix, since Strix barely gave off a magical footprint slipping through the midnight canopy disguised as a tiny bat, made her the ultimate untraceable stealth operative. High up in the branches, Strix caught a glimpse of something deeply unsettling. Snatching a grotesque wriggling grub from the bark, she instantly felt the sickeningly familiar taint of Mara's dark magic radiating from its slimy skin. Her heart racing with the thrill of the catch, she whipped around and tore. Miles away, the wicked Mara Veliax was marching through the shadows alongside Han Young and Hansu, dragging the completely knocked-out Jung Mina behind. Han Young gleefully patted herself on the back for delivering the knockout blow, but a thoroughly annoyed Mara snapped at them to pick up the pace. A blur of black wings swooped down as Strix landed proudly, dropping the squirming parasite right in front. One quick glance was all he needed. Lavis's eyes narrowed as he instantly identified the disgusting little critter as one of Mara's. He grimly laid out the facts the moment Mara ripped her way through the dimensional veil into the mortal realm. Her original terrifying form had been left with no other choice. She had to hijack a fragile human shell. Spawning these grotesque little worms was a giant, glaring red flag. It meant her current time was violently ticking against her. Mara was practically... The puzzle pieces slammed together in Xi'an's brain, and he gasped, asking if that twisted monster had kidnapped Jungmina solely to steal her body. Lavis gave a heavy nod, bluntly admitting that the odds of that nightmare scenario were terrible. Mara had always been completely hooked on stealing youth and flawless beauty, making the stunning Mina the absolute perfect candidate for her twisted desires. From there, the grim topic naturally spiraled into a debate about the sheer mind-boggling... Lavis leaned back, casually tossing out the fact that the ancient witch was actually way older than his own mother. Dying of curiosity, Xi'an pressed him for an exact number, and Lavis shrugged, estimating that in mortal years, Mara was clocking in at roughly 6,375 years old. Xi'an's jaw practically unhinged, his knees buckling as a nostalgic smirk tugged at Lavis's lips as he pulled up an old childhood memory, thinking back to the day his uncle Varkin... Tiny humans were sweating and bleeding to stack giant stone blocks for the Great Pyramids, and a booming Varkin smugly bragged that those colossal structures were being erected just to worship him. But Paimon hadn't missed a beat, quickly bursting his bubble by pointing out that the mortals were actually bowing down to the sun god Ra. Refusing to take the hit to his ego, Varkin arrogantly shot back that since he once beat Ra to a pulp, he completely deserved to steal credit for the monuments anyway. That ridiculous flashback just proved how utterly delusional his uncle could be. But Strix violently snapped him back to reality. Shrieking, Lavis's smirk instantly vanished, his eyes hardening as the sheer gravity of the crisis. If Mara managed to pull off her twisted transfer ritual, Mina's soul would be ripped from her flesh forever. Far away from safety, Mara herded her twisted little family into a decaying, half-built skyscraper that sat right on top of a bleeding dimensional rift. Pitch blackness swallowed the sky, a dead, moonless night that provided the absolute perfect cover for her sinister agenda. The guts of the concrete building were littered with rotting corpses, completely smothered by gorgeous, flesh-eating... Standing right in the dead center of that gruesome garden was the lone survivor of the butchered Hilt bloodline, locked eyes with the Demon Queen, his face immediately contorting into pure, unfiltered rage at the sight of her. He viciously spat insults at her tragic fall from grace, roaring that this chunk of the city was his turf now. But Mara couldn't have cared less about his pathetic temper tantrum. With chilling calmness, she freely confessed that her strength was tanking, and desperately holding her rotting human disguise together was becoming an absolute nightmare. But the cunning ancient demon was always one step ahead. That was exactly why she had forged her powerful little attack dogs, Han Young and Han Su. Bauer sneered, mercilessly mocking a so-called queen who had to hide blinded by rage after she insulted his precious garden. A furious Bauer lunged straight for her throat before he could even think his plan through. With a casual flick of his leg, Han Su delivered a brutal kick straight to his face, launching him right. Mara let out a wicked, prideful cackle, absolutely thrilled by her son's raw power. The scene then shifted, pulling us back in time. She nourished them with stolen water drawn directly from Zarnahim, an abyss located in the absolute darkest depths of the underworld, serving as the very wellspring of demonic souls. This wasn't just ordinary liquid. It pulsed with an unfathomable, terrifying... Mara had snatched it right from under the nose of Gamadar Vindica after he declared it his own. Her strategy was crystal clear. Mold the twins into her ultimate meat shields, buying her enough time to hunt down the perfect host body. Meanwhile, deep in the woods, Citri was tracking Mara's foul stench like a bloodhound. She guided Lavis and Xi'an straight into the heart of the twisted ritual grounds. "Please, you have to help them," Xi'an pleaded desperately, begging Lavis to rescue. Unmoved, Lavis simply snatched the boy by his throat, dragging him forward like a rag doll. With a cold smirk, he noted that Xi'an would make a just in case things went south. Citri, practically trembling with anticipation, urged Lavis to obliterate Mara permanently. Bursting onto the scene, their eyes locked onto an unconscious Manhwa, trapped inside a glowing mat as Mara gleefully prepped her dark possession ceremony. Off to the side, Bauer had already been utterly broken, reduced, whimpering and desperately crying out for his life. Smirking, Hansu casually asked his mother for the green light to butcher the man himself, ruthlessly rubbing salt into the wounds of the utterly disgraced. But suddenly, a chilling voice sliced right through the heavy. Lavis had officially crashed the party. Scanning the pathetic crowd before him, he let out a dark chuckle, utterly disrespectful. A runaway rat, a cowardly traitor who tossed his own family aside, and a pair of half-breed mutts. In Lavanise's eyes, this miserable gang of losers was a match made in hell. Mara's eyes blew wide as recognition hit her instantly. Meanwhile, Hansu glared at Jongmin in sheer disbelief. Standing off to the side, a terrified his blood running cold as he finally spotted the grotesque mountains of slaughtered bodies piled around the altar. Without missing a beat, Lavis casually gestured toward which was brutally pinned against the cold stone. He dryly pointed out that if he hadn't played the hero earlier, Xian would be decorating that exact same wall. In that gut-wrenching second, the absolute brutal reality of the demon realm finally crashed down on him. The poor kid realized he had blindly walked straight into a living, breathing nightmare. Across the room, Bauer scowled bitterly at the newcomer, demanding to know if this stranger was connected to young Mu. Then it clicked. A sickening realization washed over. If this guy knew young Mu, then he was the very bastard who had single-handedly trashed his master plan. Mara Viliax narrowed her venomous eyes sharply, noting that she always knew he was way more than just some fragile human. Locking onto his prey, Hansu bared his teeth and hissed that his instincts never failed him. He shot a glance at his mother, asking if she recognized the face of the intruder. But before the witch could utter a single word, Citri proudly strutted out from the shadows, loudly broadcasting his identity. "Bow down, this is Lord Lavis Vindica, the supreme one and only bloodline of the almighty Demon King." The exact same Grim Reaper who butchered Bauer's entire bloodline before plummeting down into this mortal realm. The sheer weight of that name hit Mara like a freight train, freezing her dead in her track. Bauer's jaw dropped. A horrific flashback of the unstoppable monster who had mercilessly wiped out his people slammed back into his mind. But in a twisted flash of madness, that blinding terror rapidly morphed into a sick, thrilling excitement. This wasn't the invincible, godlike tyrant from the underworld anymore. He was currently locked inside a pathetic, fragile, mortal shell. A maniacal grin spread across Bauer's face, fully convinced that destiny had just handed him the ultimate shot. Snapping back to reality, Mara fiercely cursed Aeneas Vindica, absolutely furious that the woman was still ruining her life by dumping her son onto Earth. Ignoring the dramatic outbursts, Lavis coldly calculated the odds. Taking down Mara, Hansu, and Han Young all at once wasn't going to be a walk in the park, especially with that filthy rat Bauer waiting to stab him in the back. Deciding the parasitic loser wasn't even worth his breath, he bluntly ordered Bauer to scram. But Bauer held his ground, violently screaming that the fallen prince couldn't boss him around anymore. "Stay, and you're a dead man," Lavis warned, his voice dripping with pure. Raising his chin, he laid down the ultimate law, declaring that every single demon hiding in the human realm was about to get a brutal wake-up call. The being had touched down. Anyone valuing their life needed to cower in the shadows until his terrifying power fully regenerated. Bauer's fake bravery evaporated in a heartbeat. Absolutely horrified that Lavis could still sling spells while trapped in a mortal shell, across the room, Mara hacked up dark blood, her crumbling human vessel buckling under the sheer strain of her power. Hansu sprinted over to catch her arm, watching as she casually smeared the crimson stain from her mouth. Yet even while physically falling apart, a twisted smirk danced. She gleefully imagined the absolute despair on Inez's face once her precious boy got ripped to shreds by Mara's own flesh and blood. Lavis fired back with a razor-sharp grin. He had a burning curiosity of his own. He was dying to see Mara's reaction. The exact second she realized her kids were slaughtered by the son of the very woman she had bitterly envied her entire pathetic life. Furious, Mara barked at Hansu and Han Young. Hansu instantly materialized his deadly weapon, while Han Young whipped out her blade, igniting it with crackling mana. But within seconds, the siblings were already at each other's throats. Hansu demanded total control, claiming he alone would butcher Lavis. Han Young just scoffed at his massive ego, brutally mocking him, while their absolute lack of teamwork was painfully obvious. Lavis instantly spotted the glaring crack in their armor. Hansu was a hot-headed show-off, while his sister was stubbornly sarcastic. Playing them like a fiddle, he danced between their strikes, baiting them into colliding with one another. Hansu almost sliced his own sister into ribbons multiple times, making his blood boil. Every single fumble earned a brutal sneer from Han Young, driving her brother completely insane with rage. Deflecting a lethal thrust from Han Young Lavis, smoothly redirect. A massive shower of sparks erupted as the siblings' weapons clashed. Mid-fight, Lavis realized these two packed monstrous raw power, especially for mere half-breeds. Mara had definitely warped their bodies somehow, yet their relentless family drama completely handicapped their lethal potential. Simultaneously, Street hurled herself directly at Mara. She screamed that she used to deeply respect the Witch of Greed, but was utterly disgusted by the pathetic monster she had become. She whipped out massive, writhing tentacles of pitch-black mana, instantly overpowering the fierce warrior. Rotting meat suit or not, Mara was still fundamentally one of the legendary. Street was brutally launched through a solid wall, leaving her utterly shattered, but she dragged her broken body back into the fray, desperate to buy Xion the time he needed to rescue Zhongminha. With Street holding the line, Xion violently. The wicked barrier seared his flesh and froze his veins all at once. His raw palms blistered a sickening red, his whole frame violently shaking from the. He was just a fragile human, but quitting wasn't in his vocabulary. Over and over he smashed his fists against the magical wall, screaming Minya's name until his throat. Finally, Mara's thin patience completely snapped. She viciously pinned Xion down with a suffocating glob of toxic mana, hissing that playtime was officially over. Without missing a beat, she triggered the apocalyptic final ritual. Complex glowing seals violently burst into existence around Zhongminha, as suffocating dark energy swallowed the chamber. Chanting a cursed ancient vow, Mara forcibly injected. A blinding purple glow hijacked Minya's eyes. The horrific transfer was finally complete. Lavis snapped his head toward the glow, his blood running cold, as he realized the clock had just run out. He tried to blast through the twins' defense, but right at that split second, a razor-thin energy thread coiled tightly around Hansu. Dozens more spectral wires erupted, hog-tying the arrogant fighter. A shadowy figure casually strolled out from the darkness. It was Jin Jae. She put a finger to her lips playfully, asking if it was truly okay to relentlessly torture their dear brother Lavis like that. But before anyone could process her ambush, Mara's catastrophic soul possession locked in. The wicked entity immediately abandoned Han Yongju's crumbling shell, violently forcing its way into Zhongminha's soul. Yongju's lifeless corpse crumpled to the floor like a discarded rag. Rising from the dust, Mara tested the limits of her fresh, stolen vessel. A sinister, euphoric cackle ripped through the desolate hall. Centuries of ravenous obsession had finally paid off. She had catching her own reflection. Mara's lips, she proudly proclaimed that this radiant beauty was hers to keep until the end of time, while Xion shrieked in pure, unfiltered terror. Suri's voice cracked as she frantically screamed out Minha's name. Lavis's face hardened into a mask of pure fury, the bitter realization hitting him that he was seconds too late. Tucked away in the shadows, Jin Jae cautiously peeked around the corner. Even with death staring them in the face, a massive blush crept across her cheeks as she caught sight of Lavis's breathtaking, battle-hardened physique. Shaking her head, she fiercely slapped her own cheeks to snap out of the hypnotic daze. Lavis was backed into a corner and sitting on the sidelines like a helpless spectator was entirely off the table. Off to the side, Hansu thrashed wildly against the tight restraints, keeping him pinned down. Sensing a sudden shift in the air, Hanyang whipped her head around, desperately scanning the area to hunt down the hidden intruder. Seizing the split-second opening, Lavis lunged forward with a ferocious, unyielding panic setting in. Hanyang wailed frantically for Hansu roared in sheer aggravation, ripping and tearing at his bindings in a desperate. Basking in the chaos, Mara turned toward her twisted offspring and arrogantly threw her arms. Dripping with vanity, she demanded to know exactly what they thought of her dazzling. Hansu instantly began kissing up to her, swearing up and down that she looked absolutely divine compared to her old self. Xion, on the other hand, was entirely paralyzed by a suffocating wave of In his shattered mind, Zhongminha was already long gone, swallowed whole by the demon. But Suri abruptly broke the silence, shouting at the top of her lungs that hope was still alive. She frantically pointed out that under the pitch-black sky of a moonless night, the absolute barrier separating mortals from monsters was critically unstable. Demonic pacts and human souls were basically walking on shattered glass. Until the sun finally breached the horizon, Mara's horrific possession ritual was fundamentally incomplete. Zhongminha's soul had to be trapped somewhere deep inside that very flesh. Right on cue, A familiar, agonizing wail pierced the air. It was Manhwa, sobbing hysterically, begging her brother to save her from the puppet strings, dragging her body around against her will. Lavis's eyes snapped wide open. It was truly Manhwa fighting back from the inside. Bursting into a venomous, mocking cackle, Mara began mimicking the poor girl's terror just for witnessing such vile, heartless cruelty. An explosive,